Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of the South Down National Park Authority's Planning Committee. My name is Heather Baker, and I'm the chairman of this committee. The Planning Committee is not a public meeting. It is a meeting held in public. Purposes of the meeting is for the committee members to listen to the officers' presentations and the public speakers before debating the issues and coming to a decision on the items on today's agenda. I'd like to remind all members and any members of the public that the park members have a primary responsibility for ensuring that the authority furthers the national park purposes and duty. Members regard themselves first and foremost as members of the authority and will act in the best interests of the authority and of the park, rather than as delegates representing the interests of their appointing authority or any other interest groups. During the meeting, you may see members using their tablets or phones. Please be assured that this is to review background information, such as the local plan, maps, or plans of the application under consideration. To minimize disruption, can I please ask you to switch your mobile phones to silent? And can I remind members and officers to speak clearly and directly into the microphone? I hope you can all hear me. Bringing the microphone forward if necessary. Thank you. So we'll move now straight to the agenda. And the first item is apologies for absence. I have apologies. Oh, it's back on again. Oh, dear. Did you miss anything important? Right. Just in case. So Daniel Stewart-Roberts has sent his apologies. So our next item is declarations of interest. I think Alan's got one.
Yes, Madam Chairman, it's a sort of declaration that I think I need to make. It's sort of a declaration of non-interest, but as you, Madam Chairman, and most members of the committee know, I'm a retired planning barrister, or barrister specialising in planning. I see that we have retired 5 years and 10 days ago, I've reminded.
Congratulations.
We've had circulated to us by the applicants on items 6 and 7 the opinion of a chap called, well, a barrister called Charles Banner, or Lord Banner as he's called these days. Funnily enough, I don't think I ever came across him when I was in practice, but I have in a legal stroke social context, a sort of lawyers' dining club, come across this gentleman and been sat next to him at events and so forth. That doesn't affect, in my view, it's a normal professional thing to arise. It doesn't affect my ability to deal with these applications independently, but I just think I ought to declare that fact publicly before we proceed to those items. And I don't think it's a prejudicial situation.
Thank you.
I just have that kind of professional stroke social acquaintance with him.
Thank you. Robert?
Thanks, Chairman. I've got a public service announcement about items 6 and 7. I am the county councillor for Petersfield, so these two fall within my area. I also know the speaker against, who is a fellow district council member, and I'm a district councillor for East Hampton. They're obviously both in East Hants. I've also got a public service declaration item 9, duty to cooperate, being an East Hants district councillor. I don't think I am disbarred for that because it's about the council that's appointed me to this body. And I expect any other district council appointees would have to make the same declaration. And I think also the same thing probably applies to item 10, which also affects East Hampshire District Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Good. So, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 13th of March, which I will take as a... Gary?
I don't know if I have to declare being a district councillor.
Oh, right.
And the other district councillors amongst us. No, it's on page 5. It's the Pulborough one. It says I left the meeting. I know my brain frequently goes AWOL occasionally, but It's 175 and 176. I didn't actually leave the meeting.
Right.
I did declare an interest in the RSPB.
Okay, hold on a minute.
Member.
I think Richard's got something to say. Richard?
Yes, you left the meeting very briefly to go and get the councillors who had to leave the meeting for that item. So it was literally about 15 seconds.
But it didn't. But it didn't all.
Thank you, Chair. Just to note that I did send my apologies and I
Yes.
apologise again.
Yes, I think we've noted that. Thank you very much. Okay, so I will sign those at the end of this meeting. Now, do we have any updates on previous committee decisions, Rob?
Yes, Chairman, thank you for that. Yes, members, I've got three things to update you with. One is relating to the Rampion 2 offshore wind farm, which has been approved by the Secretary of State. The turbines will be visible throughout the national park, and the underground cable route to reach the necessary grid connection point runs through the national park between Patching and Washington. Following the authority agreement to our local impact report in December 2023, officers took part in the examination process, attending hearings, providing numerous written representations throughout. Part of this involvement included securing the compensation fund of about £3.5 million with regard to be applied towards projects identified capable of compensating for the residual effects of the proposed development, including landscape, visual, ecological and cultural heritage effects. This was a key determinative point in the examination authority's decision-making process. Our involvement has shaped the approved documents, which will be used to inform the detailed design phase of the proposed development. So I just thought I'd update you with regard to that, member, so you're aware of that. Secondly, I can let you know that the application for Lewes Bus Station, which was, I think, considered back in September of last year, has now been issued. The decision has been issued on Lewes Bus Station. That was for 3 houses, 32 flats and some commercial floor space. The only other update I've got, members will recall, I think it was at the September meeting as well, that we considered and refused the application for the amendments to conditions on the soil recycling facility at Hambledon. I think literally at the 11th hour an appeal was submitted and is going to be considered by underwritten representations, and that's just to update you with regard to that, and obviously any progress with regard to the appeal and decision will further update you then. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Any comments or questions? No? Thank you, good. I don't believe we have any urgent items for today, so we'll move straight into development management. And the first item is land north of Buckmar Farm, Petersfield, which is an application for approval of reserved matters and details of the proposed road between phase 2 employment site and the housing site. Richard, you're going to take us through this report, please. Thank you. Oh.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and good morning, members. Before I start my presentation, I would like to draw members' attention to the update sheet. Obviously, there's been the council opinion, which Mr. Aylesbury referred to, and there is other elements that I think are fairly self-explanatory. Also, relating to items 6 and 7, I want to be absolutely clear with members that the assessment for both of those applications is contained in the addendum report and not the main report. The addendum report was to update the assessment from the originally published main report. So I just wanted to clarify that. The other thing to bring to members' attention is yesterday afternoon, after the update sheet was published, we've had some further correspondence from the applicant, Dandara, raising some points around the conditions that are in the recommendation for item 6, insofar as they feel that some of the information already provided on the application negates the need for some elements to be pre-commencement and could well be prior to slab level, as we've see on other conditions regularly. And I think on that basis, perhaps the resolution could be broadened to include Tim's delegation to amend conditions and tweak them as necessary, just to address and respond to the applicant's concerns there. I think the main point with the conditions is that those imposed are there to make the development acceptable, and it's not necessarily the case that all of the information provided is acceptable in its entirety, and those conditions are there to refine and consider some of those details in further level of consideration and detail. So my presentation will initially cover site and surroundings, the outline permission that's obviously relevant, and the proposals themselves, before coming on to the main considerations and finally the recommendation. So the application site, as you can see there, has a red line area that specifically relates to the element of access into the site that's under consideration. Just below it is the consented but unbuilt commercial scheme, just for clarity, and that was considered by members a while back. And the red line area is here. Please ignore all of these sort of paths. I think the mapping has picked up some informal sort of desire lines as well as elements of the public right-of-way. The access is obviously surrounded by trees on two sides, sorry, the red line area here, where it's a bit more open field, as you can see here, but obviously we need to take into consideration the development that's already consented, albeit unstarted. As we saw on site members, this is the area for the proposed access. There is an element of access that has already been built under the reserve matters approval, and that's the level, the extent of access that goes through the permitted commercial scheme. What I'll show in a moment on the layout plan is that the access would S-bend or snake through this area of open space and come through the trees here, avoiding the mature oak trees, which are obviously positive characteristic features here. That's just looking in the other direction, and they're indicated by the red arrows. This is a more direct look at the access itself, and you can see there is, apart from this bit of understory and some much smaller, I think it's holly trees, it's a good gap between the oaks from which to access the main housing site, and that's just the same point from the other side. So in terms of the outline permission, the plan here is the red line area from that outline consent, and that consent essentially allowed a quantum of development that related to the commercial open space and the housing area, and access from Winchester Road here, with all matters reserved. So in other words, applicants need to come back to us with all the various details for each element of the scheme, whether that's access, layout, landscaping, scale, etc. As part of that outline permission, there was also a design principles diagram that was conditioned, condition number 5. You can see here that establishes a principle of the access coming through the housing site here, which I'll come on to in my next slides. But in terms of what they have got consent for, that's the outline permission with access from Winchester Road, and all of the reserve matters since have considered all of those matters of detail. And in this case, the matters for the access are all of those details: layout, scale, landscaping, etc. So moving on to the access itself, you can see its starting point is dictated by what has previously been approved, so that's in effect fixed. And the access is proposed to snake through the open space and come through that gap that you can see on the photos and what we saw on the site visit. It also accommodates the public right-of-way, which travels through the open space. The public right-of-way actually does cut across the bend here rather than taking the pedestrian crossing here. However, because of that minor deviation, the public rights-of-way officer hasn't raised a concern there. So one of the primary reason as to why the access has changed to this arrangement compared to coming through into the housing site in that southeast corner is all about safeguarding existing mature oak trees. And this layout here offers that opportunity to not significantly impact upon what is quite a substantial oak tree in this corner. I mean, obviously the outline permission and the design principles diagram shows an inherent access through here and an impact. However, as a broader material consideration, through discussions with the applicant, this arrangement has been proposed in order to minimise impact on trees. And those yellow shaded areas are elements of the road that are within those root protection areas where a sensitive construction through porous materials, etc., and construction methodology would be employed to avoid harm. In terms of landscaping, we do have these details that show a broader scheme of native planting, whether that's trees or grassland. But as I said, in regard to the conditions, we have got a condition that looks at that in a finer grain of detail to try and ensure it's consistent with local landscape character. So we would want to look at that again to a degree. One of the main issues, and the reason why the recommendation is a resolution to grant subject to resolving highway safety matters, is we do have an outstanding objection from the Highways Authority around the routing and dimensions and visibility displays associated with the access. Of late, the developer has submitted a road safety audit, which is something that we had requested. There hasn't been sufficient time to consider that in consultation with the Highways Authority. However, it is looking promising in terms of resolving those highways matters, which is positive. But one of the issues, I think, is that highways are concerned that vehicles are required to really hug the curbs, if you like, and avoid sort of straight lining through that bend in order for vehicles approaching one another to pass. You know, certainly we're looking at that as part of the road safety audit, but otherwise we think there is a way forward, hence the recommendation. And so finally, the layout seeks to avoid impact upon mature protected trees for the reasons outlined. The route does deviate from the design principles diagram from the outline permission. However, in regard to trees, that's a sufficient material consideration in officers' views for the proposed route to be acceptable. And in terms of the Highways Authority, whilst they have concerns, the recommendation seeks to address those at a later stage. Were members minded to grant consent if you're overall happy with the position and route and layout of the access. Thank you, Chair.
Just before we move on, Richard, can we just go back to your very early statements about conditions? I'm not sure that I grasp the full implication of what you want to do with regard to these conditions.
Thank you, Chairman. So as an example, with the conditions, there would be some tweaks. So, for instance, in regard to condition 8 around surface water drainage, for instance, we have that as a pre-commencement condition saying notwithstanding the details provided, the developer believes that that could be no development above the slab level of the road in order for them to perhaps agree those details as a later stage as they gear up for implementing it.
So how many conditions are you suggesting making what you describe as minor changes to? So
They've raised they've raised concerns about conditions 3, 4, 7, 8 and 9.
Okay. and that in all cases that's to make the conditions less onerous.
Certainly in response to conditions 7, 8 and 9, that's what we would be looking to do, yes.
Okay. Right, so we've got some public speakers now, and the first one is Councillor Jamie Matthews, who is speaking on behalf of Petersfield Town Council, and he is against the application. Good morning.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. The Town Council has always supported the principle of the development of this site and promoted its inclusion as a site allocation through the development of the Petersfield Neighbourhood Plan. The plan sets out a mandatory design framework for the development of the entire site, which includes employment, local green space and residential housing. However, the approach to date has been somewhat piecemeal, treating the employment and housing allocations as standalone applications without consideration of overall access arrangements, and we have previously highlighted the issues with this approach and potential impact on the trees. This application originally proposed that the access would have been implemented straight through a veteran oak tree, which had inexplicably been left out on the design drawings. The outcome is this amended but rather unsatisfactory proposal. The Neighbourhood Plan Design Framework has 3 relevant requirements. Where the access road crosses the local green space, it must have an east-west pedestrian priority. The character of the road should protect and reinforce the landscape characteristics of this open space, and there should be a connection between Bell Hill Recreation Ground to the local green space. This application fails to comply with all 3 of these requirements. The area referred to in the officer's report as open space is in fact local green space, as defined by the NPPF. It is a neighbourhood plan allocation in its own right and not simply some open space as a product of the housing site. Development in local green spaces is only permitted in certain circumstances, and the relevant policy in the neighbourhood plan, NEP2, is not considered at all in the report. The development of the access road and its associated works should be considered in the context of it being located in a local green space. The revised access point, whilst benefiting from not impinging on the existing trees and also aligning more with the design principles in the neighbourhood plan, has resulted in an overly contrived access road with many bends and a convoluted alignment for vehicles and pedestrians. We are concerned that the applicant has chosen an access road that is designed ad hoc, failing to consider the constraints and opportunities that this site offers. The access design responds solely to highway standards. Development within the local green space takes the most versatile area, which can be used for recreation and relaxation and so on, as it is the flattest area and the furthest away from the noisy A3. Usability is compromised by the drainage infrastructure, the proposed access road layout, banks and fenced off areas that defeat the main purpose of the local green space, which is to be usable for the public. If the committee is minded to approve the application recommendations in the report, we would urge you to consider including further conditions which ensure the neighbourhood plan design framework requirements are properly considered, along with the proposed design taking into account its setting within the local green space. Thank you.
Thank you. Well timed. We don't have any other speakers about this application, so members, it's now over to you. Who would like to make a start? Paul.
Can I just ask Richard about his statement that the starting point of the access road is given? Just to clarify to what extent that is given, because when you look at the plan, you think it would be much easier if the access road went somewhere to the west through the commercial element. But to what extent is that all really given?
Richard.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Paul. The commercial scheme here is already consented under reserved matters approval. The road through it is consented as part of reserved matters approval, so that is all given and consented. They can legitimately be building that. So that point there, in answer to your question, is fixed.
Thank you. Andrew.
Yes, really, again, points of clarification. Obviously, I understand what is happening and why it is happening and why a really quite heavily engineered outcome is being considered. Do I believe, from what I've read, that the road is actually being raised above the existing ground level because of the drainage, the underlying drainage issues? In other words, the engineering will have to get it above. I notice a blue sort of slash below the curve of the road. Is that a SUDS facility there? Also, I read somewhere else that the road in itself, because the Highways Authority have expressed concerns about the road, which will hopefully be addressed by the SUDS, but as it stands, my belief is that there's what they call a table in the road. In other words, it's raised to try and slow traffic down. And again, it will cause an engineering impact on it. But I just wanted to clarify that, raise that, because as I think you're beginning to get the feel from the sort of comments that Paul Bevan's made, that in order to get past that Sussex weed, we are having to look at this alternative, which in itself is going to bring implications, though not to a single, be it mature oak tree.
Okay, Richard. Andrew, your microphone's still on. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Andrew. The blue area that you indicated, yes, that's the Suds Basin. That's the first answer. In terms of banking along the road, yes, that is proposed. As one of my slides here, just in anticipation of questions, this is a cross-section through the road, and hopefully you can see that banking there. What I would say, and it comes back to the conditions, is conditions number 4 deals with levels, and we want to have a look at that further to try and see what can be done to mitigate some of that engineered character and appearance that you're suggesting is there. If I go back to the that image is fine, actually. Yes, so these symbols here indicate that this would be a raised table through the majority of the access, and that is to slow vehicular traffic as it goes round the bends. Okay. I think I've answered everything. Thank you.
Okay. Do you want to come back on that one?
Yeah, I think, yes, one thing I'd like to come back on, and indeed we couldn't really see the section through the site. It was obvious, and your description has made it obvious that there is something engineering happening, and it isn't at ground level. But what I'm also interested in is the profile of the SUDs, because we've seen SUDs on sites where they've been very severe and have not only looked severe, required signage to say keep out or words to that effect, but also there's engineering works attached to the SUDs itself. Just the visual impact of that SUD. Is it going to be fairly restrained and a basin, or is it going to be more ravine-like?
Thank you. So I do have another slide that shows a cross-section through the SUDs. Appreciate it's somewhat small on the plan that's been submitted, but you can see those graded banks, and that's also reflected in the sort of internal outline within the SUDs that gives you an indication of the extent of those banks, and you can get an impression of its shallowness there as well in terms of the comment that you made. All I would say as well is the levels condition would look at that, and also the landscaping condition in trying to soften it.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on. Gary, you were next.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Can I just ask Richard to put up the tree impact, yeah, that one. Now, we determined that there are going to be a couple of raised cushions to slow traffic down. I doubt if you can go particularly fast through there anyway, but I'm sure some people will try. Now, the question I would like to ask is the bank, the raised humps, are they going to come in once everything is built? Because if you've got 15-ton, 16-ton lorries going around there, they're not going to last very long while they build the site out. Secondly, and that's another reason why I'm slightly concerned, and I've got to agree with the town councillor here, is I don't agree at going through the other gap, but big lorries going at speed are going to compress the route system, and the road does sort of do it, unfortunately. So is there, I mean, we're going to have a construction management plan, and it's on, I think it's condition 9. Are they going to control the speed, or are they going to be, you come onto this site and you only do 10 miles an hour or less? Because you're never going to get two 16-wheelers, two 16-ton lorries going through there at the same time. So I'm really slightly concerned about this, because you're going to get lateral movement of the lorries, and that will impact on the root ball system of those trees there. Unfortunately, from my point of view, as much as I like oak trees, and I have a couple in my garden, that would have been a better idea if that oak tree wasn't there, to be perfectly honest. But we're not going to, we can't do it, but I know, I have, look, it's going to die anyway. If this isn't controlled, they will die.
Okay, let's hear what Richard has to say, and then we'll move on to it.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Gary. I just want to clarify that the yellow shaded area on the right-hand side is for the pavement, the footpath. The actual road carriageway itself is outside of it, so that might help. Also, in terms of the building of the road, I mean, obviously, if members were to grant reserved matters, it's up to the developer to some extent in how far they build the road to access the housing and build it. Typically, I suspect most of it would be built in one hit, and then there might be some final resurfacing to finesse the scheme as at later stages in the construction process. But we are trying to secure suitable levels and details for the access.
Okay. John.
Thank you, Chairman. Richard, it's just a clarification, really. The status of the open space that this access crosses, can you just clarify that for me? Thank you.
Yes, I mean, apologies, I referred to it as open space, but Councillor Matthews is right. It's allocated as local green space in the neighbourhood plan.
Thank you. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I completely support the comments by Councillor Matthews in relation to the principles of the neighbourhood plan being supported throughout this build. I think this is incredibly important that the views and opinions of the local communities are taken into account when they've taken the time to put a site forward. Then we should be very cognizant of any deviation from that. I think that's hugely important. But my main comment regards the trees. We're talking a lot about trees and the maintenance of the trees, and trees are in and of themselves important features. We get that. It's not just the trees themselves, however, it's the wildlife that they support. And that's where I have concerns about this. Because an access road will come with lighting for safety reasons. And this site has been acknowledged as regionally and county level importance for its assemblage of bat species and the numbers of bats within the species. And one of those species, at least one of those species, is of national importance. The barbastelle. We talk about the barbastelle bat an incredible amount at this authority because of the SAC at the Cocking and Singleton tunnels. It's a significant constraint. That species is present at this site. What we don't have are bat roost assessments for the site. So any lighting on this scheme has to, within the law, avoid disturbance of bat roosts, access, egress, commuting to and from. We don't have that information. And this severance of the linear feature, which bats use to navigate the countryside, if there's extensive lighting through that gap, then you've created a north-south light barrier, effectively, along that feature. And that's a significant concern. There will be comments around the ecology reports and the impact assessment saying it will conform to X, Y, and Z. However, the roost assessment is important because you can't avoid light spill onto a roost unless you know where the roosts are, and we don't know that at this point. So significant concerns around the bat impact.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a comment to make? Go on, Richard.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to clarify, the road is not proposed to be lit. That's the first thing. The ecologist hasn't raised any objection to the application. That's the other thing I would say. Also, with the access, there needs to be an access somewhere through the tree belt to facilitate the delivery of the housing. And we consider that this is the least impactful in regard to trees. And then finally, the loss of scrub through the trees is compensated for with additional native shrub planting to try and mitigate and support ecology in that particular vicinity.
Well, it's not, clearly under these circumstances, it's not possible to keep that corridor absolutely protected because we've got to get through it. And that's the least damaging place to make that space. Okay. Robert.
Thank you, Chairman. My concern focuses on what the Highways Authority has said, and Richard started saying this is subject to the Highways Safety Audit. I'm just concerned about it being premature because we've got a Highways Authority that's objected. We don't yet know if this road is safe. When you read the Highways Authority's comments, they are very concerned about the nature of the design of this road. They've objected to it. I don't see how we can give permission with the Highways Authority, which is the safety experts on roads in the national park, objecting to it. I just, in the past, we've looked at Highways objections. This is not a holding objection, it's an objection. So I'm just staggered that we were thinking about approving something that the experts tell us they think is unsafe, they haven't done a safety audit, and they may come back and conclude it is unsafe as their comments suggest. So I would suggest that I'm going to struggle to support Richard's recommendation. I'm very happy if we defer it to actually wait till we've got that safety audit to have the Highways objection lifted. But I don't see how we can give permission with the Highways Authority objecting.
Thank you. Becky.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just clarify that the recommendation isn't for you to grant permission today. The recommendation is for you to delegate that decision to Tim Slaney to consider the satisfactory resolution of the highway safety matters. And if they aren't resolved, the authority is delegated to Tim Slaney, is directed to refuse. So this isn't you granting permission here today, this is you delegating authority in principle to the Director of Planning. I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Yes.
That's exactly the point I'm making. I think this is a decision for the Planning Committee, not for the Head of Planning. And that's exactly the point I'm trying to make. I think this is an issue that we as a Planning Committee should be prepared to make a decision about today on the evidence in front of us, rather than delegating to our officers to decide at a future date.
Thank you. Antonia.
Building on the point that John asked about, the fact that the Peacefield neighbourhood plan has this as an allocated green space, it seems inevitable that there will be an impact on that green space. Clearly, as Richard has said, there has got to be a road into the housing development. So the question is, are there any further conditions that we could put in at this stage to align the delivery of the road better with the principles that Councillor Matthews referred to in the Peacefield neighbourhood plan? Is there anything more that we could do? And also, picking up on what Rob has just said, is that something that we could in fact delegate to the Director of Planning? It seems to me that that might be a better way than trying to design the scheme at the committee here.
Okay, thank you. Richard?
Thank you, Chairman. Let me get my cursor. The originally proposed route at the outset of the application did propose the route coming through the southeast corner of the housing area. That is consistent with the design principles diagram that's appended to the report and I showed you, that is conditioned as part of the outline consent. So there is an acceptance there of the access going through the southeast corner and inherent impacts. Through the discussion with this application, what's before you members is the least impactful route in terms of trees. If you have got concerns around its route, dimensions, visibility, the implications are of that is that repositioning it will lose at least one large mature oak tree in that southeast corner. What we're saying is if you're happy with the positioning, overall layout that we can see there, then that gives us a platform, if you like, to negotiate further on the highways points that the Highways Authority are raising. But obviously there's some differing opinions between the applicant's highways consultant and the Highways Authority that us as officers are trying to rationalise.
Thank you. Oh, lots of hands now. Who's next? Gary.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, for allowing me to come back. I fully support what Robert's just said. This is far too important just to be delegated. We're the decision makers.
Can't hear you, Gary. Can you
Sorry.
get the microphone a bit nearer?
I agree with Robert
Thank
on
you.
this. This is a very important decision that the planning committee should make that decision. While I totally respect the years of experience from Tim, we're the ones who's going to be on the firing line if we get this one wrong, I'm afraid. I think I personally either defer it or refuse it because I don't like that road. I must admit, I don't like where the road is going. So I'll leave my thoughts to the vote.
Thank you. Rob, I'll come to you in a second. Rob's got something he wants to add.
Yeah, I'd just like some sort of to provide a bit of clarity with regard to the sort of direction of the discussion. We have an issue here whereby there's a concern about the element in the recommendation that says being delegated to the Director of Planning and subject to the satisfactory resolution of highway safety matters, including receipt of a road safety audit. And I know that Robert mentioned about the importance of Highways Authority comments and objections. I just sort of want some clarity from you members, because in this circumstance we have included within the recommendation that to address that issue by saying it is subject to Highways sort of confirming via a road safety audit that they are actually happy with that. Now, if we defer the application to get that clarity and that confirmation, that is essentially what we're delegating to Tim, is to ensure that we get that. If we don't get that, then we bring it back to members. But if we get that, would that change the recommendation in that respect? I just wonder, by deferring it, what difference that actually makes, because that's your concern you've raised. We've addressed that and put that safety net, as it were, in the recommendation. So that's what I'd express a slight concern with regard to deferral in that respect for what you're saying. And as Richard has pointed out, we have an issue here where we have negotiated and worked through a route into the site that protects that oak. And whilst it may be not the ideal solution in terms of the fact that, but it is considered to be preferable than the loss of that oak in the officer's view, and that's why we've worked to that, and we believe that it is a workable solution in this respect.
Okay, thank you. And Alan.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I'm just a little bit concerned about the line which Robert McAtter and Gary Marsh have now taken. It sounds fine in principle, and it sounds like a fine principled stand, but experience with highway authorities does lead me to think that the approach that's been explained to us by Richard Ferguson and then added to by Rob Ainsley a moment ago is quite a reasonable line to take in the circumstances. Given what the situation is, we most certainly are not in the position where it would make any sense at all for this committee to be refusing rather than just deferring the application on highway grounds, just because we don't know finally what the highway authority's reaction on the highway safety audit approach to the matter is. But I just want to have it confirmed by Richard, please, if possible. What I understand is the basic sort of factual situation here. As I understand from the papers and all the explanations, we've got one outline planning permission, and I'd have this confirmed, that covers both the principle of the highway access from the south, from the point that Richard has explained several times, which is fixed because that's been given detailed consent to there. And that same outline consent includes the housing development in the northern, much bigger part of the same site, which has got to be accessed by a road from the south, starting at the point we're talking about. We obviously know what was envisaged, the straight ahead sort of route that was envisaged informally when those design principles were looked at. But in view of the, I'll call it discovery, but realization, or whatever the term is, that there is this valuable old big oak tree in the way of that way of doing it, is there any way of getting to the rest of the permitted housing site that is to the north, other than by a form of what one might call zigzag or slight double bend or whatever, along the general lines of what we're considering here?
Thank you. In terms of that position that you outlined, the answer is yes, as you've understood it. The second point is that the access going through the trees that you can see there, that is a natural point between oak trees. If members were to consider a separate, different route, or indeed reverting back to the design principles diagram, you will lose a mature oak, possibly more if the access is repositioned in some ways. What we have outlined in the report is that this is the least impactful in regard to facilitating the delivery of the housing site at some point in the future.
Okay, so there's no other way through, basically. Okay.
Unless we lose
Stephen.
trees.
Stephen.
Thanks. I just want some clarification. You said there's no lighting along that road, which is very helpful, thank you. Not at the pedestrian crossings nor at the raised table, because I've got some concerns about our, well, known unknowns, that we don't know what the safety audit is going to produce. Now, if the safety audit suggests there needs to be lighting at the raised table and the pedestrian crossing, which I understand is National Design Guide best practice, I could be wrong, then we have the lighting impact issue raising its head. So if we are going to approve the recommendation, then I think the scope should be expanded to include ecological impact assessments subsequent to the safety audit if lighting is recommended by the safety audit. Otherwise, we're in a situation where we may lose a significant piece of information.
Sounds reasonable.
Thank you. We have received the road safety audit in recent days. Obviously, we haven't had the opportunity to consult with the Highways Authority on it, but what that road safety audit is showing is that the engineers believe it is safe and it doesn't include the lighting. But of course, we need that further clarification with Highways.
Right. So we're short of quite a lot of information, aren't we, really? That's one of the problems. I think Andrew is next.
Thank you. A small thing, leading on from what I said earlier. I'm always concerned by the implications of the landscape implication of SUDS, and I was wondering, and it is slightly straying into the other site, but the relocation, the proposed relocation of the access, does it have any impact on the drainage of that site? Because there is, if I recall, the remnants of a ditch along the bottom of the field above, and that ditch will presumably something will have to be done with that, because it was there for a function, and that is to drain the water off that field. But does it have any impact on the ground to the west of it, which is the lower side of the diagram as we're looking at the, I think I'm right, no, south of it really. Does it have any impact? I'm just thinking, because sometimes you say, oh, we'll move this, and you look at all the big issues, and then there's something else there which in itself becomes a big issue. And water it's a wet site, and I was therefore wondering whether or not we are going to cause a problem which we might overlook.
Are you suggesting that there's another location that there was a ditch on that field, other than the one we can see on the plan? And if so, where was it?
I'm sorry, but that's not a ditch, that's a sod.
Yes.
Yeah, but no,
So
there's a
where's your
ditch. I
ditch?
believe there's a ditch run where, yes, where the cursor's going.
Right,
There's a ditch on
okay.
the lower side of the field above, which is the housing site
Okay.
field, in a manner of speaking. And obviously that water has got to go somewhere, whether that, we don't yet know, of course, whether or not that entails digging out that ditch. But as we like to keep water on site, and as there's a lot of water around that site when it is wet, there are, how should I say, overflow implications potentially.
Okay, Richard, do you have a comment on that one?
Thank you, Chairman. No, we don't foresee an impact, and that's on the basis that this SUDS feature accommodates the surface water requirements for the road itself. Secondly, where the road comes through the trees and crosses that ditch which you refer to, that has been taken on board in some of the more technical design around sufficiently culverting across that ditch that would also allow it to still free flow and function as a ditch and watercourse. I hope that helps.
Okay, thank you. Robert?
Can I ask just about this road safety audit we've got from the applicant? Does it apply with Hampshire's LTP4?
I'm not familiar with Hampshire's technical guidance in absolute detail, I'm afraid, Robert, but we would be relying on the Highways Authority to tell us that.
Okay, my point about that is now what Hampshire's adopted, and it makes a much greater focus on pedestrian and cyclist safety. And I'm concerned about roads which have quite significant S-bends going through trees for its impact on cyclists, and whether that complies with LTP4, and I suspect that it does not. And therefore, the fact that we've got a road safety audit from the applicant isn't in any way the same thing as Hampshire changing their views about this is an irregular, contrived, unsafe route. That's what we have in front of us. And I'm staggered that we can think about approving in any way an application where the Highways Authority says in front of me, irregular, contrived, unsafe route. That's what we've got. That's the information to us today. I'm staggered that we can even consider saying yes with that information.
Rob?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of points to come back. I don't intend to add any more than to the fact that we've provided that safety net to address that in the recommendation by delegating it to the Director of Planning. Once we have the safety audit that has been checked by the Highways Authority, and we have, I would assume no objection or they would put their comments to us. We will address that if it does come back with objections, obviously, and that would be a consideration for us. So I don't know what more I can add to that other than that is covered within the recommendation. Whilst I have the microphone, if I can mention about the ecology as well and the issues with regard to that, as Richard has already pointed out, the road safety audit doesn't provide any details and doesn't say that there's going to be any lighting with regard to that element through there. Again, I think we have the issue that if there are elements that are raised by the Highways Authority with regard to that, we can address that as part of the process. So, you know, that if that is raised through that, we can consider that. So that's all I have further to add.
A lot of questions, aren't there, really? Actually. Janet?
Thank you, Chairman. I've had the opportunity now to listen to all views, and I have to say that I come to the conclusion at the end of the day that we've got the right recommendation here, And we have the item 2, where the highways will fall with their Director of Planning, of whom it's already been said we have confidence in, and if we didn't, we'd say, I can assure you of that, but we do have confidence in. In my opinion, and having listened to everything, including the lighting situation, which no doubt he will take on board in his deliberations with the Highway Authority, that we don't want lighting even for the crossing. I actually prefer the wiggly road through. I'm not very keen on great straight lines, I have to say, so that doesn't worry me at all. There's been a lot of points raised. I'm sure you've all taken them on board, and I think the site is you know, the recommendation we've got is okay.
Gary?
Won't prolong the debate. If Tim was to come to a decision, would it be in conjunction with yourself and your vice chairman as well?
Yes, can do. Yes. Yes, that would make sense.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, it does say that. It says delegated to the Director of Planning in consultation with the Chairman of the Planning Committee.
Right. Yeah. Sorry? It's recommendation 1. Okay. Stephen?
Just a very final point, Chair, I think. Could we have those confirmations regarding the lighting, should they be brought forward by the Hampshire Highways Authority, that's written into the recommendation as point 3? Is that a possibility?
Are you happy with that? We can do that, can't we?
Yes.
Yes, we can have that written into there as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, does somebody want to make an alternative proposal, or are we happy to go to the proposal that we have in front of us? In which case I will need a proposer and a seconder. Thank you, Janet.
Can I just confirm at the beginning, the officer recommendation from Richard was to add on some additional words to deal with more detail in the conditions. Does that include
lighting?
No, not the lighting. At the very beginning of Richard's presentation,
Oh, right.
he referenced the fact that the applicant had come forward with some minor amendments to the conditions. Yes. Can I confirm that the resolution that you're referencing and that you're proposing will make a minor... I mean, what I was going to suggest was where we talk about the delegation to Tim, and the first one's a satisfactory resolution of highway safety matters. The second one is the conditions set out paragraph 9.2, and any amendments or other conditions required to address highway safety matters as necessary. I was going to suggest, based on what Richard said, that you add on something like and or any necessary amendments to address reasonable concerns of the applicant, so that there's an ability to make very minor changes to those conditions that are listed in the report.
Yes, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yes, yes, we're happy with that. Stephen, you look confused.
I'm confused and concerned that there's still no reference to lighting in there.
Yes.
No, we can add the reference to the lighting in the Roman numeral number 1, as you suggested. We can pop that in.
Yes. Are we all comfortable? Paul, obviously not.
Could Richard just say again what the areas of modification might be in the conditions?
It's not changing the fundamental details. It's the phasing and staging at which they need to be considered. Also, some of the we'd be looking at levels details as well as other matters like landscaping. But it's more about helping to facilitate the delivery of the access through the agreed details.
So we're talking about timing here, not for instance, specific materials.
It's predominantly about timing with regard to slab level as opposed to commencement, although there are elements within there where, notwithstanding the information that's been submitted by the applicant, we want further details to sort of make sure that we can get the best in terms of landscaping and levels as far as that's concerned. So is that fair enough, Richard?
Yeah, there's still details we want to... There are still details that we want to consider as officers, which actually aligns with what elements that members have been talking about this morning.
So we're talking about there's an ecology in 7, drainage in 8, and construction management plan in 9. So those are the three that you're concerned about, aren't they? Oh, and 3 and 4 as well. 3 is materials and 4 is levels.
4 is levels, yes,
So
I
it's all
would
about
include all.
when that could commence with regard to having given you further information. Is that okay? Right, good. So to the recommendation, which you have in front, well, you almost, yes, you do have in front of you, including what Becky has added to those recommendations. Are we all comfortable? We know what we're voting for. So may I have a show of hands, please, in support of that recommendation? And against? 1. And abstentions? 1. Thank you very much. So that application is permitted. Thank you very much. So we'll move straight on to agenda item 7. Agenda item 7 is the same site, and this application is for Development Reserved Matters application pursuant to this application involving details of access, appearance, layout, scale, and landscaping. So Richard is going to take us through this one also. Go ahead, Richard, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, just prior to starting my presentation, obviously, again, draw members' attention to the update sheet. Hopefully, it's all self-explanatory. There's nothing in particular that I want to flag up, but obviously happy to answer questions through the course of considering the item. So, as before in the previous one, I'd like to first of all consider the site and surroundings, cover the outline permission and effectively what has been consented for and what has not, but I think I've covered much of that in the last item, so I won't labour that. Address the proposals, the overall design considerations before moving on to the recommendation. So as members are familiar with, this is the site that we saw, and the area of proposed housing is in this large green area here, surrounded by the protected TPO trees and other mature trees and vegetation around it. Overall, it's a roughly 7-hectare site. We've obviously next to the A3. And what you can see also in the aerial photo, particularly more so this one, is the area of rush pasture that is referred to by our landscape officer and ecologists in their consultation responses. And from an officer and consultee perspective, that is one of the features of the site that reflects its diversity, landscape character, and also reflects the geology insofar as the underlying clay, I think it is shallower at that point, which makes this area wetter, and that type of habitat has sprung up as a result. This aerial photo also shows a purple line here. That's the line of the public right-of-way, and that's important in one of the reasons for refusal, which I'll come on to. Excuse me. So this is from the southern end of the site, looking northwards. Again, you can see that rush pasture here and all the various mature trees surrounding the site, and rush pasture through here. And then this is the southern site boundary in its entirety, so the access would come through here, protecting the mature oaks either side, and you can see the maturity of that boundary. Again, this is through the local green space in relation to the access, and then here we have the much broader open space on the western side of the site. You can see the tree boundary there, which separates the open space from the housing, and then this is the northwest corner of the site, which again is field and provides an access at the top out onto the public right-of-way and countryside. Just to very briefly recap, obviously the outline permission grants that quantum of development and access from Winchester Road. It also conditioned the design principles diagram, which shows the area of housing in here, coloured orange. And so that's what's consented. What members are considering that hasn't got consent is all the reserved matters associated with the development, so access, layout, scale, appearance, landscaping. Associated with that diagram within the core design framework that was submitted during the consideration of the outline consent, that indicates that the diagram should be read with the core design principles from that document. I won't go through all of them, but the key ones to be mindful of is number 1 and number 3 in regard to what our local plan is requiring, which is, as we all know, a landscape-led approach, and conserving, enhancing ecological networks, and of course ecology falls into one of our into our first purpose as well. So this is the overall proposed site layout. And what you can see here is the mix of properties ranging from flats through to larger detached dwellings. The layout reflects the access that members have just been considering. I would acknowledge that the developer has engaged with officers through workshops last year and since the application was submitted back in August, I think it was. However, the reasons for refusal relate to our own officers' views in applying our local plan policies with an eye to the outline consent. But what we have here is, as I said, the range of house sizes and typologies. We also have a hierarchy of routes running through from that main access. So we have a secondary shared access running through here. In terms of some positives, the variety in the typology of buildings from flats through to your larger detached dwellings, we haven't objected to the mix per se. In principle, the directness through the site out to the countryside, or indeed for future residents to access towards the town centre and the Bell Hill Recreation Ground, that directness is a principle we've generally supported. And also perimeter block layout, so dwellings facing onto the roads, and that's, you can see a perimeter block there and here. And obviously we've been supportive of the provision of open space, which aligns with the local green space allocation. Some of the areas, key areas that we have been concerned around is obviously addressing SUDs and the ecology on site, and I won't go into too much detail on that. We do, however, feel in that respect that the scheme does impose itself upon those characteristics, those defining characteristics of the site, whether it's functions to do with surface water or ecology, particularly when considering the landscape-led approach in working with those characteristics. Elements that we are unhappy with is, in particular, the regimentation of properties in the central area, which you can see there. Other elements are the flats here in terms of creating an attractive entrance into the site, and also the public realm behind these flats. You have rows of parking, wide access, and parking on the other side, parallel parking, which we think creates a poor public realm in regard to that particular area. We also consider that there's insufficient green infrastructure running through the site, so street trees, for instance, and swales, which I'll come on to. Really, I think one of the key points particularly from our design officer consultation, is that even if the rush pasture didn't exist, consultees have raised notable urban design considerations that have led to their objection. Ultimately, to accommodate the 85 dwellings, the space is having to work quite hard. And as our design officer points out, that many issues could probably be resolved if the density would be higher. But I think that's one issue that we haven't really necessarily agreed on with the developer. This is to depict the layout in a different context. This is the layout, the landscape strategy, sorry, and the blue areas indicate the suds basins and the surface water drainage features, so swales within the development itself. So you can see the scope and extent of those blue areas. Whilst infiltration is a bit more difficult on this site because of the geology, I think what we have been concerned about is so much pipe-to-pond solution, which is a form of suds, but our policies and approach is more about a holistic design of capturing water at source and managing it that way. Moving on to the proposed dwellings themselves, we've always held the opinion that officers, that is, that a contemporary approach is acceptable in principle, but ultimately it needs to be rooted in its context and speak of Petersfield. Now, our design officer talks about the elevations being quite flat and fail to provide that interest of more articulation, which is more of a typical positive vernacular of Petersfield, whether that's bay windows or detailing within the elevations. In terms of materials, the whole scheme is entirely proposed with slate, which is uncharacteristic of Petersfield, and also a darker reddy orange brick is more characteristic of Petersfield, and clay tiles for the roof. A mix of clay and clay tile and slates would not be unacceptable in principle, but I think we have had concerns around the extent of some of the materials there. We would accept that elements of that could be conditioned, but I think it's the scheme as proposed. Overall, we have some concerns about how the scheme relates to Petersfield positively. These dwellings are actually the sort of semi-detached and terraced, so you don't read them as single plots, but I just wanted to show you some of the smaller properties, and you can see the variation in coarse brickwork between the different frontages, and we've seen that on the detached larger dwellings as well. Moving on to the flats, again, I think overall we don't believe that the flats in their entirety respond to Petersfield positively, and that's in relation to elements such as their shallow pitched roofs. The elevations appear as large masses, and the horizontal coarse detailing doesn't really mitigate for that. And also the black boarding, particularly when it's employed at the upper floors as well, there's not really a positive precedent for that, I think, in Petersfield, as well as other elements like a sort of, long, fairly monotonous ridge lines. You can see that. This is just to show you some of the other flats. This one is in the southeast corner. And then this is a block of flats that would be in the northeast corner. Again, you can see how the shallow roofs are arguably disproportionate to perhaps the rest of the elevations that you can see there. I mentioned the regimentation of properties in the central area of the site, and this site section through that area serves to highlight that. And as you can see, there's properties of the same character and form, which really emphasize that concern officers have, consultees have, in regard to the character of street scenes. This is just another street scene, really primarily to show members the flats in a bit more context in terms of the two blocks of flats that would be in the southeast corner, and how they might relate to one another and be viewed from within the scheme. And again, some of those larger, the terraced properties, how they might look as sort of joined units compared to the elevations I've just shown. In terms of the overall design summary, I should just try and recap, because I appreciate there's a lot of slides and images there. Ultimately, officers, as outlined in the report, still have some significant concerns around the layout, and that covers a breadth of issues that are outlined in the report. And for the elevations and the typologies and characteristics of the houses, whilst a contemporary approach could be acceptable in principle, we don't feel overall that the scheme really reflects Petersfield positively. In terms of the third reason for refusal, it comes back to technical highways details. Again, I think ultimately there is conflict between SDNPA officers' views of trying to achieve characterful street scenes versus Hampshire's guidance on junctions, footpath widths, visibilities, etc. What we have said to the developer in the past is we can be more flexible on some of those standards, particularly as the roads are proposed to be unadopted, where they can comply still and be safe with all the various necessary guidance. But ultimately, we want to see a characterful scheme. And the scheme has been, the applicants contend that the application has been designed fully in accordance with a document called Manual for Streets, which is an urban design-related document, rather than slavishly following HCC's technical standards. Ultimately, from our perspective, we want to see a scheme that has safe movement through it and through the access and egress. And there has continued to be that dispute between the applicants, engineers and consultants versus highways. And I think really at the moment it hasn't been fully demonstrated that we have that safe movement through. It's not to say it's not unachievable. The reason for refusal relates to lack of information and demonstrating that to us. So it's more of a technical matter than reasons for refusal 2 and 3. As you will have seen in the update sheet, reason for refusal 4 has recommended to be deleted from the recommendation on the basis of some last-minute response from the lead local flood authority. So that, again, was a reason for refusal on a technical nature, and officers don't recommend that that is sustained. Turning to reason for refusal 5, that relates to the impact on the public right of way. What I've had our GIS mapping colleagues do is use the site layout plan that's been submitted and superimpose the definitive route of the public right of way with the acoustic barrier that we have been raising concern about. It's clearer on this image here than the detailed layout, and what you can see is the acoustic barrier in blue, and then you can see the dashed public right of way, and you can see it very much closely aligns with it, and it, in fact, even potentially goes behind it up here, and that's some of the conflict that we have continually been concerned about and raised with the applicant previously. One solution to that is relocating the public right-of-way onto the proposed footpath through the open space, which would be a good solution to address that issue, and it would certainly help with the amenity of the public right-of-way. In the rebuttal comments that we received from the applicant recently, they contend that a public right-of-way next to an acoustic barrier actually improves its amenity in terms of reducing noise from the A3 immediately adjacent. I would counter that by saying walking along, a barrier, however it might be landscaped in front of it, I think does distract from its amenity. So I don't think that really, from my point of view, their rebuttal comments have convinced me as case officer otherwise. But as I say, a solution would have been to relocate that onto the public right-of-way, and officers would support that in the future. So overall, the recommendation is to refuse the application. We have obviously been aware of the outline planning permission and the parameters around that, particularly in regard to the design principles diagram. Overall, in terms of design summary, we don't consider that we have an acceptable layout. We are concerned about approach to SUDs and green infrastructure within the development. And also we're concerned about the architecture in regard to its context with Petersfield and the impact on the public right-of-way as a fifth reason for refusal. So in terms of the overall planning balance, members are here to consider the access, layout, scale, appearance and landscaping of the scheme. All of the detailed reserve matters. The principle is there. We do accept that within the balance, were you to grant consent, that would facilitate the delivery of the site and would have associated social and economic benefits, but we as officers do not feel that they are outweighed by the concerns raised. And on that basis, it is recommended that reserve matters be refused for the reasons set out in paragraph 9.1 of the main report, minus reason for refusal 4 as per the update sheet. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. Very comprehensive walkthrough of that application. So we now have some speakers for this application. And the first public speaker is Councillor Jamie Matthews, who is speaking on behalf of Petersfield Town Council once more, and he is against the application.
Thank you. Hello again. The Town Council is pleased to see this development site being progressed. The Council has a special interest in seeing proposals developed in accordance with the framework and policy requirements specified in the neighbourhood plan. Housing mix, and in particular custom and self-build mix aside, which are matters not being considered in this application, our key concern is that there are fundamental deficiencies in the layout and access design and some unjustified departures from the neighbourhood plan's design framework. We support the general principle of the layout as it responds to some of the requirements in the design framework. The general layout shows roads and public realm facing onto the existing green infrastructure. However, a number of plots fail to comply with this requirement as they turn their back or side on this. There is also doubt about the relationship between the plots in the far southeast corner with this green and blue infrastructure. Whilst we support the provision of SUDs within the site, we are concerned that the largest basin is not located at the lowest point of the site, and instead the lowest point in that southeast corner is proposed with flatted development. These SUDs features and development will lead to significant retaining walls in prominent locations, slopes, concrete gravel boards and other engineered features that detract from the character of the location. The revised scheme includes development within the root protection area of Oak Tree T46, which was intended to be retained and protected with the moving of the access road. We would have expected a buffer between the developable areas and gardens of the development and the existing green infrastructure to ensure that trees are not affected at construction and that they do not suffer future pressure as they would shade small amenity areas. The applicant states that the street layout adheres to a road hierarchy. However, this is not the case given the significant and constant changes in width which have been introduced for vehicle tracking. We would support a road hierarchy that better reflects the scale and location of the site in line with the design guide SPD. The applicant claims that the scheme now includes shared spaces, but the layout plans indicate roads and footways, and therefore it appears there are no shared surfaces on the site. The council would be supportive of shared surfaces where they demonstrably contribute to placemaking, reduce speeds and make more efficient use of land. Some of the 3-storey blocks of development are located at one of the highest points within the site, where the design framework indicated that single-storey housing would be more appropriate. The council would have expected that any departure from the neighbourhood plan policies with regard to building heights would have been justified with sufficient landscape evidence, including a visual impact assessment. And finally, the proposal is not clear on how the site will provide pedestrian connection to the Bell Hill Recreation Ground. This southeastern corner of the site is constrained by trees, the ditch and ground level changes, and the applicant has not explained how the new path would reach the recreation ground and continue through in a way that is sensitively designed.
Sorry, you've run out of time. Thank you very much. So our next public speaker is in support of the application, and this is Jacqueline Mulliner, who is representing Dendara Southern Limited.
It is with regret that we are faced with an officer recommendation.
Could you bring your microphone down a bit, please? Thank you.
And have provided you with a briefing note, which I hope you have taken the time to read and consider. In this limited time, I reinforce the RMs are made in accordance with the outline permission. That permission includes a condition which requires compliance with the approved design principles diagram, not the whole document. That is a misunderstanding perpetuated in the original officer report and which has, I suggest, led to an onerous approach to layout matters, ultimately representing a reconsideration of the principle of development. Such reconsideration is not legitimate, CKC opinion. In short, the principles diagram simply shows land to the south and west of the tree line as open space and land to the north of the tree line as developable residential, and that diagram has been complied with. Dandara has worked hard to accommodate officer views seeking the in-situ retention of habitats located within the developable area, but a refusal based on retaining a greater area of rush habitat would go to the principle of development. I say this because the approach would sterilise about 25% of the residential area. Its retention was never envisaged, and instead appropriate mitigation has been put forward in accordance with the outline. My colleague will talk about highways and landscape-led approach, but we have been encouraged to move away from county highway standards to create less urban environment. Instead, the scheme meets National Manual for Streets and is technically robust. But if a highways reason refusal is given, the applicant and others would lose trust in the authority's stated flexibility. Moving to design, it is disappointing that requested improvements to flats and materials have not been accepted, but they are submitted and you could accept them through conditions. In all other respects, the scheme has evolved to present a strong, high quality and bespoke offer, appropriate to the South Downs. Subjective design views differ, but it is frustrating that whilst we have sought to provide varying house types within clear street hierarchy, officers have sought to increase densities, to urbanise the scheme and inevitably narrow the mix, creating issues with parking and further reducing the land available for sustainable drainage and tree planting, particularly noting the pressure to significantly reduce the developable area, contrary to the outline. Dandaras have rightly resisted, and whilst improvements have been made through constructive dialogue with some of your officers, the outstanding main elements of objection appear to be underlined by a wish to revisit the principles. In conclusion, the principal nature, overall scale and developable area is not open for reconsideration. There may be other ways to configure the layout, but that does not mean our approach is unacceptable. It is well considered and justified. It represents a strong and high quality landscape-led approach. Respectively, permission should be granted.
I have run out of time. Thank you very much. The next speaker is James Taylor, who is also representing Dandara's Southern Limited and is in support of the application.
I'm speaking on behalf of our landscape architect and highways consultant. This scheme has been landscape-led from the outset and follows the landscape principles established by the outline consent. We responded carefully and positively to the setting within the national park. A full landscape and visual impact assessment was carried out at an outline stage, and an addendum now produced concluding that the level of landscape and visual effects are less than predicted at outline. A supporting landscape statement has also been submitted, providing evidence that the scheme is responsive to the contextual landscape, which included a detailed review of technical landscape matters. The landscape approach has evolved through pre-application and application, the approach discussed with officers at each stage. The design review panel welcomed the integration of green infrastructure, the sensitivity of the landscape strategy, and the emphasis on site-specific responses. These discussions have shaped a landscape framework which is robust and policy aligned. The proposals include extensive native planting, hedgerow restoration, and generous open space in line with the outline. These elements are visually beneficial, softening the development edge and enhancing setting, and serve ecological and recreational functions. Importantly, the right-of-way running along the public open space has been retained and enhanced as part of the wider green infrastructure corridor. The introduction of a noise attenuation barrier along the site's boundary with the A3M has a dual benefit in significantly reducing noise intrusion and, crucially, improving the amenity value of the public footpath running alongside it. We recognise that the recommendation for refusal states that the scheme does not fully address a landscape-led approach. However, we believe this overlooks the depth of assessment, the quality of response and informal agreement to the proposed landscape strategy, upon which the scheme has been based. With respect to highways, again, the scheme follows the outline principles. With a single vehicular access, although its position has moved to safeguard trees, the road designer sought to meet your aspirations, seeking to reduce hard standing and promote a softer landscape-led development. This is contrary to requests from Hampshire Highways, who have sought compliance with their latest guidance, which increases the widths of roads and extent of hard standing. We have sought to work with Hampshire and your officers to try and deliver a scheme acceptable to both, but ultimately the final scheme is landscape focused. To deliver this, we have used private roads, meeting Manual for Streets guidance, and the layout delivers highway safety and promotes multiple traffic calming features to maintain low speeds. The scheme has been subject to a Stage 1 road safety audit. Regarding drainage, the scheme has been developed in conjunction with the landscape and master plan proposals and accords with the outline. I'm pleased that the lead local flood authority has now removed their objections subject to conditions. Outstanding comments have been addressed, and the proposal meets both national and local policies regarding flood risk and surface water drainage in accordance with the outlined approval. Thank you.
Thank you. And our final speaker is Tim Horn, who is representing himself. Good morning.
Good morning. I am a very regular user of the public rights-of-way adjacent to the site and have been for over 20 years. I fully appreciate why the unused fields have such development potential, and I have no strong objection given that the plans clearly maintain a green space to the west and south. I used the excellent new portion of footpath only this morning. For that reason, I speak as a for. However, I and many other walkers are most concerned about the impact that the works and end result will have on members of the public wishing to access the adjacent countryside. Though Tor & Co have advised me that continuing access on foot through the area would be maintained through a construction management plan operational through the build period, the Construction Traffic Management Plan Section 2 actually states, public right-of-way route 18912-1, which follows Beckham Lane, would also cross the extended Princes Road. The proposals would also require the diversion of the route along the western section of the site. It is anticipated that a temporary traffic regulation order would be required to temporarily suspend the public right-of-way during some parts of the construction. A formal application would be submitted to Hampshire County Council prior to this occurring. I would expect construction to take quite some time. A similar-sized housing development at Penn's Field in Petersfield has been going on for several years. Thus, the intention to temporarily suspend the public right-of-way during some parts of the construction risks losing this heavily used major footpath, which is the only main route from the west of Petersfield towards Steep, for a prolonged period. While there may have been bat and dormouse surveys, has anyone actually established how many people currently use public right-of-way? Closing the path to suit the developers' needs might satisfy their wants as cheaply and as easily as possible, but at the expense of the wider community. Consideration should be given either to a detour or even a temporary footbridge over the access road. Path detours could circumvent the development either to the north and east or possibly to the south along Beckham Lane, but they would need some sort of pedestrian crossing where the access road comes in. Furthermore, the long-term solution needs to ensure the safety of walkers crossing the access road. While I fully accept there is a national need for more housing, public right-of-way 18912-1 was there long before this proposal. Public rights-of-way need to be safely preserved throughout the development and afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that concludes our public speakers. So now, members, it's up to you. John. Somebody's microphone's still on. Oh, it's a public speaker's microphone. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to move off clarifications to comments on the scheme, actually, at this stage, because we've had so much information. I'm struggling a bit with this application, and I tend to come down on the side of officers in terms of the level of detail and the actual scheme itself. There's a comment here about it being suburban in its view. Now, actually, I believe that it's missing a stack of opportunities in terms of being a landscape-led site. It does have quite a high density, but that doesn't mean that you can avoid actually taking some of those spaces within the site and actually making more of them, increasing more tree planting, for instance. So I think there's a big missed opportunity there. I'm also struggling with the building design and it being of local character and the materials being of local character as well. So I think there's a definite review required at that point. And there's a whole stack of details, in fact, that I think are slightly needed, or needed, if you like, to progress the scheme, in my view, to something that we can consider for approval. So that's my point.
Thank you. John? Sorry, Stephen was next, and then I'll come to John. Stephen, go ahead. John. Oh, John, your microphone's still on. Thank you.
Thank you. Some clarifications. I'll go back to clarifications. The acoustic barrier. The style and height of the acoustic barrier in terms of materials and the location. Is that actually the confirmed location? Because that's already in a sound shadow from the existing vegetative shelter belt. So that acoustic barrier won't have any effect in that location. I just want some confirmation of that. That seems extraordinarily bizarre place to put an acoustic barrier.
Okay. Richard.
Thank you. The application is supported by a noise assessment undertaken by the developer's consultants, and through that, in order to safeguard the amenity of the properties nearest the A3, it has been determined that that is required in order to mitigate some of that noise. In terms of what it looks like, I think it's a 3-metre high timber barrier.
Thank you. John.
Yeah, I was just going to echo what John also said. There's sort of the lack of opportunity here in terms of the design. I'm concerned about the gable ends, corner plots, the ridge line, lack of trees, lack of street interest. It just seems there's so many opportunities here which don't seem to have been grasped. And I can only agree with the officers in terms of the poor design and the sort of modular layout. I know it's a demanding site and there's a lot of houses trying to be put onto this site, but I think we can get so much more out of this. My second point was something which one of the speakers raised. The public right-of-way, is that indeed going to be suspended for the entirety of the site construction?
Richard.
I think that's something that we would need to discuss through conditions were the application recommended for approval. They would need to discharge a construction management plan, and I think that sort of detail would be covered under that, but obviously it's not the recommendation before us.
Okay, thank you. Alan.
Slightly frustrated that you were looking at the other side first, because I really want to ask one question, which is sort of fundamental to what we're doing before going on and making...
I do apologise.
No, that's all right. It's just that, given that this is an application relating to details on an already existing outline permission and so forth, and given that we are, I think, all aware, at least if we've looked at what's been sent to us recently, that there's been quite a strong push from the applicant side to suggest that there should be a deferment here rather than a refusal. I was expecting that we'd hear, at least in summary from our officers, why they are recommending a refusal rather than deferment, given that this is a site with a planning permission, albeit not detailed. And I think we need to understand that before going on to decide whether deferment or maybe refusal, because I've got some comments about the details of the proposal, but why are we in this position of having a refusal recommended, given that it's a permitted site, rather than a deferment?
Okay, let's let Robert answer that.
Yes, thank you for...
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yes, thank you for that, Alan. Obviously, with regard to this site, as has been sort of said in the report and certainly in Richard's presentation this morning, there has been a lot of discussion, a lot of work undertaken and some steps forward taken as part of that process. We did, however, get to a point in February where there was a point where there was going to be submitted plans as a result of discussions. And we did feel that whilst those plans took it a little further forward, it hadn't got to the point by which we could come to a positive recommendation. As I think we would be fair in saying, there are elements to some of the more technical reasons for refusal that we believe further discussion and consideration could actually knock those reasons for refusal out of the way. And if members were minded to refuse today and this went to appeal, it's more than likely that we might be able to address those during the appeal process. I think our main issue is that there are fundamental issues as outlined by Richard in his presentation with regard to the design and layout that leaves that gap still some distance between ourselves and the applicants. And we believe that a deferral might be able to address some of those more technical issues, but there still seems to be a gap that hasn't closed in terms of what we consider to be more fundamental design and layout issues. So that's why we have would be suggesting that a deferral wouldn't be the option in this respect. We're back again. Yep. Yes, from an officer point, that would be our position, that we believe that, but obviously it's up to members to consider whether that's an option for them, but we believe that there's still issues that are more significant that wouldn't be an easy fix and might need more fundamental sort of consideration.
Okay. Andrew, I think you were next. Oh, Alan, do you want to come back?
Well, yes, if I could just come back. I'll just say in relation to that, I'd be interested to hear whether colleagues say anything else on that particular point. I have some reservations about the wisdom, as it were, of relying on sorting out details within the context of an appeal process. I mean, I know it does happen, but it doesn't. It's not a very reliable way of planning authorities getting what they think is desirable out of the situation. It does sometimes happen. But can I just perhaps take this opportunity, if I can put it that way, to throw in my comments about the actual detailed proposal? I'm aware of that legal opinion that was being promoted to us by the applicants, and clearly it is the case that at the detailed stage a planning authority should not be demanding or requiring something which is at odds with the terms of the outline planning permission, or what the outline planning permission related to. But it seems to me, I have to say, although my position would be that I can see the case for a deferment here, there are things about the proposal as it stands, which are deeply unsatisfactory, and they're not things which relate to trying to cut down on the scope of the outline planning permission. I must admit, I, at least on this committee, am rather dismayed to have heard several times that our officers, on what basis I cannot begin to imagine, have gone out and promoted the notion that this should be a contemporary style design. Somewhat, I have to say, illogically to my perception, they're also saying something which I do agree with, which is that it would be better if it more clearly reflected the character of development to be found in Petersfield. But I find that personally somewhat at odds with the promotion which we say has taken place of the notion that this should be designed in a contemporary way. And actually, it seems to me that slightly unusually perhaps, but our landscape officers in this case, in the context of their wider objection, have taken a number of points which exactly put the point in the way I would like it to be put, in the way I regard the position in relation to that desirability of reflecting the character of Petersfield as a place. We are, after all, in a national park where we should not only be protecting the landscape as far as is compatible with the need to provide some housing, but also having regard to preserving the desirable aspects of the characters of our settlements and so forth. So when our landscape officer says, and this is on page 38, I think, in our report, complains about suburbanisation, no reference to Petersfield or its context, I say, absolutely. It seems to me that's exactly the case. Or in his or her fourth or fifth bullet point, anywhere houses with uncharacteristic repetition materials do not reflect Petersfield. I say exactly. It seems to me this is an unattractive design which doesn't reflect the character of Petersfield, doesn't reflect typical Petersfield materials. It is not the sort of development we should be promoting. But part of the reason for that is that, it seems, we've encouraged them to go in for a so-called contemporary design rather than one reflecting the character of the existing settlement of Petersfield. I know Petersfield is a settlement with varied architecture, but it is not beyond the wit of man to get an intelligent understanding of what would represent development sympathetic to the existing character of the settlement.
My understanding of the officers' position in that is that they had said they were not against a contemporary design.
Well, that's what it says in writing. But
and indeed, there's no reason to say why a contemporary design shouldn't reflect better how Petersfield looks. It's just that this one doesn't. That's the point,
right.
Isn't it? I can't remember who's next. Was it Antonia? Go ahead. Oh, perhaps it was that. Anyway, go ahead. Antonia.
Yes, I was just on that point of the urban design considerations not being reflective of Petersfield, which it seems absolutely we must insist on as a consequence of many of our policies. I was surprised to see that the applicant didn't refer to that point at all in the speaker who addressed us earlier, neither of the speakers. I mean, these seem to be fairly straightforward points that could have been addressed about, for example, the not having entirely slate roofs across the development instead of having clay tile roofs, more red brick, no black boards. I mean, these seem to be straightforward points that could render the design and the materials more appropriate to the context, but they haven't been addressed at any point. Other points about layout seem to me important. So it doesn't seem to suggest a very responsive approach from the applicant. That said, I was concerned by what the speaker from the applicant said about our requirements to protect the wetland rush habitat, effectively sterilising 25% of the developed area. And I'd like to ask officers to address that point. Is that true, that the protection of the wetland rush area would effectively sterilise as much as 25% of the area?
Thank you. Richard?
I can't clarify the 25%, but certainly with the rush pasture, what consultees and understanding the landscape character of the site is to accommodate that, to reflect natural processes and landscape character of the site. You can better see that in the aerial photo here. It's the darker colour there.
Does that answer your question?
You think a quarter of the site is an exaggeration or not?
Yeah, roughly around a quarter. I obviously haven't measured it, so I have to say that caveat, but I think as an estimate, I wouldn't necessarily disagree that the applicants are wildly out of the 25%.
Okay, thank you. Andrew.
Yes, I was interested in a few words that Richard Ferguson said in his initial assessment. He said that the space is having to work hard. And I think that is, quite a lot of the comments that have been received since reflect that. One thing I was going to ask is, of the actual built site, that is not the site to the left adjacent to the A3, what is the density of housing development on that site? There is reference, as you say, you've shown us the area that is rush pasture or is assumed to be, but certainly my assessment of the site when I saw it is that potentially a lot of that site is rush pasture or is would be prone to be. Because what we're talking about here, and I've noticed that the surface water drainage issue has now been addressed. So that has been removed from the reasons for refusal. However, I always was more worried about the groundwater issues. And whereas in what I would call a normal old-fashioned planning application, when it comes to dealing with water, that would probably come more under building regs because it would be out of sight, out of mind. We are very much looking at a landscape-led design. We are looking at SUDs. We are looking at trying to sort of keep things as much as they are, as much as possible. But looking at the development site as has been given to us by the developer, I'm wondering where on earth is all that happening? Because are we going to see a lot of, either we see a lot of hidden culverting of water, in which case that has to be removed off the site, or you've got a problem somewhere or another, or it's somewhere in amongst that mass of building. And from what I can see, and although we haven't had it described to us exactly, I'm just wondering where on earth is the space, other than in the ponds which are shown, the sub areas which are shown, to enable the water that could be coming out of issues in the ground after a wet winter, spring spell, which could inundate that site. Now, as I say, normally that's a building regs issue, but you would probably more inclined to look at it at that. But we're trying to keep it there. It's part of our raison d'etre. And what, so really, I think I probably covered that enough at some, to really ask that question. But the one last thing I was going to say is the third bullet point of the executive summary says this current application considers all reserved matters of access, layout, scale, appearance and landscaping. Is that everything? Is that, in other words, there's nothing more that should we be minded to permit this? There's nothing more that this would be the last time this application would come in front of us, no, unless there was some other unforeseen issue.
I think that's enough, don't you? Richard, do you have some comments there?
In answer to that first question, yes, that is everything. And you forgive me if I've misunderstood elements, but one of your questions was about density of opposite. I don't have an exact figure for you for what is the density of the housing further to the east, but I think what we can see on the aerial is that it's a mixture of detached and semis, so I think that's all I can say about that. What I can say about the scheme itself, if it helps, is that I think 85 dwellings within that housing area, by my reckoning, it's around 37 dwellings per hectare at the moment, from my own calculation. Okay. Other elements, I think that was about it, actually.
Andrew, did that satisfy your questions? microphone, somebody?
Yeah,
There
let's
we are.
come back on now. No, it's really this issue that whether I don't know in whose ball in whose court it falls. It's this issue of where's the water which is on site actually, how's it going to get to the suds, and where is the reed? There's an area of reed pasture referred to, and I'm not sure we've got another diagram here. I'm not sure that that's been described to us.
Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Here's a slide I prepared earlier. Right, just in case, drainage matters obviously arise. So this is the drainage layout, and you can see the blue lines indicate a sort of pipe to pond solution. So that would be underground, Andrew. Where we have had, and the reason for refusal 4 that has now been removed was around the technical feasibility of that scheme that has been put to us. There are broader, more holistic landscape-led considerations of the scheme around how it manages water, how it reflects the natural drainage patterns on site and landscape character that certainly consultees have raised. But hopefully that diagram gives you an indication of the drainage scheme.
Thank you. Stephen. Somebody's microphone still on.
Thank you. I just want to, I'm still on clarifications before I go on to comments, I'm afraid. The point raised by Councillor Matthews regarding the TPO incursion of the southeast corner. Now, we spent some considerable time talking about the access road layout to avoid impacts on TPO and TPO route protection areas. So can we get some clarification whether there is actually incursion into the TPO RPA in the southeast corner of the site? And then I'll make some comments, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Richard.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is the tree protection plan taken from the arboricultural report. I'm sorry, it looks very busy and there's lots of detail there. I'm not sure you can quite closely see my cursor. I think really there may well be some marginal elements there, but I think the key thing is that the tree officer from East Hampshire District Council hasn't raised an objection in regard to trees and proximity of buildings to them.
Has he?
Our landscape officer has obviously raised some concern around layout and protecting the trees as well. So there's a differing opinion there, but the tree officer hasn't raised a explicit reason for explicit objection that would translate into a reason for refusal.
Okay. Stephen, you obviously want to come back on that.
Yeah, okay, thanks very much. So whilst on the diagrams, you can see the finished locations of buildings during construction, there is obviously movement around those areas. So quite often you find a TPO route protection area is incurred upon considerably by moving plant during construction phase, which isn't shown on diagrams. But I just wanted to pick up on the comments about the Rush Meadow and the fact that it was stated that 25% of the site has been sterilised by the maintenance or protection or consideration of a Rush Meadow. Now, I think that terminology is indicative of the approach taken thus far by the applicant. It's seen as a sterilisation of the site rather than a landscape-led opportunity. I think that's significant, and that doesn't give me much faith in this project. To me, this is a square peg in a round hole. This appears to be an off-the-shelf design using standard off-the-peg materials that is trying to be shoehorned into a site that is sensitive, that requires to be landscape-led, is inside a national park. It does not work. And unless we get some considerable movement on this, I think I'm going to struggle in future. So I have no qualms whatsoever with supporting the recommendations of the officers at this stage. I think it's very disappointing to have this design coming forward at this stage. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think Paul was next and then Debbie.
Thank you. Do you know, I've got some sympathy with the developer. We've got outline application, outline consent for 85 houses here. And the landscape-led approach that we're demanding, rightly, does, in fact, when you look at the overall plan, take maybe a third of the site. And, you know, suddenly we're discovering rush pasture that is rush pasture more, which can be moved to some degree, is that more valuable than homes for people? I don't know. I don't think so myself. I think, you know, we have to remember that we're addressing the needs of communities, of places to live, as well as the environment in which they live. This is a site next to the A3M and a business park. You know, what are we expecting of it? Obviously, there's this issue of design and contemporary approach. I don't think contemporary needs to be boring and bland, and I accept that it doesn't look terribly imaginative, but you know, the request for a deferral seems to me to be an offer to address issues like that, the materials, the interest of the design, maybe elements of the regimentation of the layout. And I'm interested that Alan agrees that, you know, this is something that may not easily be resolved through negotiation and appeal. And I think really I'd be in favour of acceding to the applicant's request for a deferral to see how far we can go in addressing those issues. Because when we look at the reasons for refusal, the drainage, the Lee Flood Authority has withdrawn number 4. I think number 1 is frankly over-egged, given how much the site is given over to in response to the landscape-led requirements. And I think if we can focus on the issues in number 2 and reduce their impact and as a reason for refusal, then we're getting somewhere.
Thank you. Debbie.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst I appreciate the efforts that have been made to protect the trees in the previous application, when you put up your slide, Richard, showing that the drainage of this, what is it, a 6.5 acre, 2.63 hectare site is going into suds, which are all adjacent to those trees with TPOs, are we not in risk that those trees actually will end up being undermined by the additional water coming off of that site?
Richard.
Thank you. Particularly born out of our landscape officer's concerns, explicitly asked the tree officer to comment on aspects like location and proximity of suds, basins, and impacts on trees more widely, put those points to them, and they've come back with a no objection response. So, you know, I'm reliant to some extent the technical expertise that we've sought from them. But counter to that, obviously our landscape officer, you know, has a differing opinion in that respect.
Okay, thank you. Robert.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to make some point to Paul. I am actually going to propose a deferment. The reason for that is I'm very aware this is a site with an outline permission for 85 houses. When you look at the size of the site, any plan for 85 houses on this site is going to cause an awful lot of unease on different grounds. When you go through the different issues to do with the drainage, the slope of the site, the required density, all those problems are going to be there however they try and solve it. I think that the Town Council raised 2 important issues, one of which is access into the town, about the link into the recreation ground next to it, and the link into the public right-of-way that goes across the bottom of the site. I think those 2 problems are solvable. My view is an awful lot of the technical aspects that are in point 2 for refusal can be solved. I think they're solvable. I think there will be eventually this site will have an allocation of 85 houses that actually we give permission for. And I think that compromise by the developer may move us closer to what we find acceptable. And I would very much like to try and go down that route rather than refuse it. I'm very nervous about looking at the design principles and the idea about what is a PIN's going to think about those design principles and whether we're right or whether the applicant is right. I don't know the answer to that. I think that's quite a big risk. I'd rather, before we go down that route, try and see if we can come to a solution that's more acceptable to our officers and then come back having had that deferred. So I would like to propose we do defer this for several months to try and come back to a scheme that is acceptable to our officers.
Gary, you had a comment you wanted to make?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've listened with, but when you hear one of the speakers asking for a deferment, and I can understand, Richard, your frustrations and Robert, to get into this stage, if the information that you wanted was actually forthcoming, as opposed to now can we have a deferment because we've got a refusal in front of us, that to me says that you haven't got all the information that you should have had for the whole of this scheme. There are so many things wrong but could be just tweaked a little bit. Could you just tell me where I know where the flats down here are. Are they the ones with the balconies, or the flats at the top are the ones with the balconies, please?
If I can answer that specific question, that's the flats at the entrance to the site, and you can see the balconies there. There's Juliet balconies on the other two blocks of flats.
Whereabouts, sorry, Chairman, whereabouts is where the balconies are? Whereabouts on the site?
Right, okay. So let me bring up the larger layout plan. So here are the flats in the southeast corner, and then there is another block there. The ones with the projecting balconies that I showed are here. So you have balconies on those ends.
Okay, thank you. Go on, yep. Microphone, somebody.
Thank you. I would actually support Roberts for deferment, because I think when you got the applicant saying, oh, can we have a deferment, please, because we haven't given you all the information. I do think with more information and a compromise, potentially it could work. The one thing I could say, if we do defer, could you actually put up design a slide where the reed rushes are in light of where we've got like something like that? I assume it's that big lake, but I assume that's all I think it is. But I just cannot see how this site is going to work with the amount of water that we actually found when we went on that site. But we'll see.
Okay. So we have, sorry? Well, Alan wants to comment first, so just before...
Can I just make it clear that having put it as I put it earlier, I do support what Paul Bevan and then Robert McCatter and Gary has agreed with as well. It seems to me that deferment, rather than trying to sort things out potentially in an appeal context, is the way to deal with the issues which are outstanding here. So I would certainly support that.
Robert.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Yep.
Yes, thank you for those comments with regard to the deferral. Members, obviously as officers we've set before you what we consider to be the remaining concerns with regard to that, and as said earlier, the fundamental issues are in relation to the design and the layout. If members wish to charge us with a deferral to go away and work with the applicants to try and address those issues, I think we need absolute clarity from you on those elements that we've highlighted in our reports and in the presentation today that we have concerns with regard to that you wish to be addressed, because it's not fundamentally about perhaps changing a balcony here or another element there. There are elements that we've talked about with regard to the design in terms of, like we've talked about, the uniformity within the development of the site, and with regard to the other elements, with regard to the issues that we've mentioned, there are a number of issues within there, so we need absolute clarity, and it won't be an easy and a short fix to get those done. So if we are agreeing to deferral, that could take quite a time to sort of address those issues. So we need your steer on what it is that you want us to go back on, and what things you think that officers are misguided on, if you consider that. So, you know, we need that clarity.
Okay. Antonia.
Well, just on that point, I think that it was the urban design considerations, it was the materials and the layout. It is not the mix of the buildings that seemed to be satisfactory to yourselves, and I don't think anybody was concerned about that, particularly the split between one beds and two beds and larger ones. That's okay. It's the urban design considerations.
We've got a list here of things that this current application is considering in bullet point 3 on page 29, and we've got several items on there, and presumably you want us to know whether or not we want all those discussed or some or part of them or what have you. That's what we're looking for. But prior to that, let's decide whether or not we are in support of deferral, and then we'll discuss what the details are that need to be within that. John?
I mean, this might be sort of cart before the horse, but could we have some guidance on the sort of length of time of deferment?
It's on
the length of the time of the deferment.
The length of the time of deferment.
Are we talking 2 months, 6 months, a year?
Okay. Rob, have a go.
My view would be that any amendments that would be required as a result of this would need to be subject to fresh consultation and give people the opportunity within which to respond, all the interested parties. Given that, yeah, I think you're at least talking till July, and for those discussions to be had, and there would need to be some significant discussions with ourselves and the applicants about the elements that we would need to be addressed as far as that's concerned. So it would require work on their part in order to address those elements, which may take a while before it even comes back for going out to consultation. So I would think you'd at least be looking to July, and I won't want to be held to July, so I'm just saying that.
That's only 3 months.
Yeah.
Could be 6.
I would hope not. But.
It could easily be 6, though, couldn't it? Okay, we've got a proposal for a deferment. John?
So could we actually, part of that, say the deferment up to 6 months? You can't do that?
No. No. Do I have a seconder for this deferment? Gary, thank you. So, Becky.
Sorry, Chairman, I was just going to say it might be helpful to have the discussion about the reasons first, because they need to form part of the resolution, really, for deferral for specific reasons, so that officers have that jurisdiction to go away and have that discussion. So I think a short discussion about the reasons first.
Okay.
And then follow that with your vote.
So we've clearly got layout and design and appearance. We've also got on here scale. Scale? Probably not. Probably not scale.
Can I suggest that scale and access?
What about access? Access is one of the items that's on here.
Well, access also relates to access around the site, and obviously that was part of the issue with regard to the highways reason for refusal, so that would be mopped up as part of that as well. So,
okay, and that would be part of layout anyway.
Okay.
Okay, landscaping for the B5 dwellings, for the 85 dwellings, landscaping is also not satisfactory at the moment. Drainage. Yeah.
Yes.
Page, sorry, what did you say? Page 35?
All right, page 35, the design objection as follows. I think if the vast majority of those, and that's where I am very unhappy with there. I think most of those, if they could be covered, you're getting the design element probably sorted. We've all agreed 85, yes. We don't really have a problem with so much the actual.
Yeah, sure, but we need a list of things that we want them
Well,
to,
you're there,
to talk
they're there.
about.
On page 35, under the design.
So you're suggesting that all we need to say is we need them to look at the design, full stop.
As laid
Well,
out.
yes, yes.
As laid out on page 4.5. If
Relevance to the Petersfield context.
Members, can I just mention as well that with regard to this, I think one of the things which is a fundamental issue here, which we'll at least need to explore, is with regard to the rush pasture that is mentioned, and whether there is the potential for that area to be increased, as it were, as non-residential in that part, and what potential there is for that. I get that was part of the conversation. I want to check whether that is part of what you want us to address. And can I also mention that with regard to when you talk about materials and design and urban design, I know the issue was raised by Alan fairly on with regard to the mention of contemporary. From our point of view, we consider that contemporary could work if it's rooted in context. And I think from our point of view, any further discussions we have will be about whatever approach they take on the design, that it is rooted in context to Petersfield.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. I can't hear you because you haven't got your microphone on, and the guy next to you's got his hand up to speak. So I'm sorry, I'm going to take Paul first, and then I'll come to you, John.
Anyway. Yeah, I'm concerned about just adopting the list in 4.5, because we're talking about layout and design and the interest in the design. So it's contemporary but not bland, and it's reflecting the context, as Rob said. And I think, just to answer Rob, in relation to this rush pasture, I don't think that's an issue that we need to pursue. You know, I think there's plenty of accord taken through the drainage, the SUDs and the drainage strategy and the whole design to accommodate those elements. And there's an undertaking somewhere in the back and forth to transpose, or whatever the word is, the rush pasture. So I don't think we need to hold up the conversations between the authority and the applicant with those sorts of issues. I think we should focus on the appearance and the sense of place and getting away from the regimented and rather suburban layout that I think we all object to.
So we're back to appearance, landscaping, layout, design. John.
Just going to suggest that it's covered in 4.5 and 4.11, so it's consideration to those two elements.
Is that an addition, or just John? Is that an addition or just a confirmation or a request?
That's a request.
4.11. Landscape, yeah. So we've talked about landscape, yeah. So landscape's in there. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so inclusion of 4.7 ecology, I respect Paul Bevan's comments on that, but you know, this isn't about cherry picking. We're an authority with a primary purpose of protecting and enhancing biodiversity. This isn't an application for a housing development outside a national park that doesn't have those considerations front and foremost in its decision-making process. We have to include the ecological impact assessment, I believe.
Absolutely. Do you want to say something?
Is that okay?
Yes.
Members, I'm conscious that you've got those paragraphs you've mentioned give you an awful long list, and I don't believe that we will be covering every single bullet point of every element of those paragraphs. I would hope that we can have regard to them but we have the and sort of explore, but I think we have to be realistic here and think that we need to talk in more general terms to assist the case officer in those negotiations and discussions with the applicant, and sort of the overarching principles of what you said about appearance, sense of place, regimented appearance, landscape layout, and we work to a more sensible list as far as that's concerned. But we will have regard certainly to some of those points which have come out of those consultation responses from the various people. Is that acceptable?
That's yes, she said determinedly. Andrew.
Yes, with reference to 4.11, I think everybody's, or there seems to be a general sort of feeling that a rush pasture equals reed bed next door to the suds. Totally different thing altogether. And I've always been concerned, and I think one or two others are, where this rush pasture fits in on the site. Furthermore, that said, you can't just leave them. They have to be managed, and management of it, of course, is an issue which has to be addressed. So it's just really to ensure that everybody knows that we're talking about rush pasture, which is totally different to reed beds, which could be adjacent to or within a sud system, and a rush pasture really not.
That will be part of their discussion with regard to landscaping. Have we got it? Becky's got it. Good. Okay.
Sorry,
Gary?
I do apologise, but 4.9 is the highways objection, and they've rejected there's no pavements in front of 52, 53. But I cannot understand why they haven't put a pavement in, but there's obviously a reason for it. It's little things like that. You're just little things that you can just take cognizance of when you're in your discussions about it, because you could then maybe be able to get rid of the highways objection, and you've taken, I thought Rob was very sensible about the design part of it, and I fully support what you've just said. It's just little things that they could make it better, and you can't understand why there ain't no pavements outside these houses. That's all.
Thank you. Becky, do you want to identify anything else?
No, Chairman, I think you can move
right.
To the...
We can now move to the
you've got
deferment.
You've got a proposer, I think. Have you got a second
and I've got
as well?
a seconder, Janet. Gary was a
And I think
seconder.
Rob Ainsley summarised it, as long as that's acceptable to the proposer.
Let's just make sure that the assembled community are happy with what we've got. Anything else that you're concerned about or you think we haven't included? Right. Can I have a show of hands then, please, in support of deferral for this application? And a show of hands, thank you. Did we count that up? Yes. Objectors? 2. And any abstainers? No. So that application will be deferred for further discussion with the officers and the applicant and be brought back to this committee in due course. We'll have a 5-minute comfort break now, members. And I'd like you back at past, please.
Richard. Go.
Members, would you like to retake your seats?
Let us reconvene. So the next item on the agenda, agenda item 8, is the Selborne Conservation Area Character Appraisal and Management Plan. And delivering this report to us once more on this particular type of topic is David Boyson, who I have to say is probably making his last appearance with us. The lucky chap's retiring. We're all insanely jealous, even those with... Even those of us who are already retired are still jealous of your position. So, David, please go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, Selborne Conservation Area Character Appraisal and Management Plan, which, as you know, we call CAMPS. Just to remind you all, just what conservation areas actually are. I usually start CAMPS presentations with this, just so we all know what we're talking about. That's a duty on us, placed on us by the 1990 Act, to determine which parts of their area are areas of special architectural or historic interest, the character or appearance of which it is desirable to preserve or enhance. That's effectively your definition of a conservation area. So we periodically have to review our area to see if there are any that aren't designated that should be, and if we identify such, we are meant to designate them. But we also review existing ones. And that's what we have here. So Selborne was first designated in 1970, which makes it one of the first conservation areas to be designated in Hampshire. And it was actually designated by the county council, because this, of course, was before the current districts came into being in 74, I think it was. It's been reviewed and extended a couple of times, last time in 1993, which of course is now actually scarily 32 years ago. And at that time, there is a rather lightweight appraisal, which, to be fair, was the sort of thing that was done back then. I'm not trying to be critical of the other authorities. That was what was considered appropriate at the time. But it was done, and I think it was associated with the 1993 review, although it is undated. What we have had recently is a new village design statement produced and adopted, and I have to say I think it's one of the best village design statements I've ever seen. And obviously a VDS can extend beyond the conservation area, so I was quite keen in producing the current appraisal that the two are aligned and work together. Sorry, those of you who are hazy about the geography, that gives you an idea of where Selborne in the red oval, north of Petersfield basically, and west of Borden and southeast of Alton. And just in the park, the yellow boundary on that map is our boundary, so it's just in the park. No, I'll keep doing it again. This is the actual village and the current boundaries, and I'll come back to the boundaries towards the end of my presentation. But as you can see, it's basically a linear village, High Street running up through the village and then heading off towards Alton. That road is actually a 19th century creation. The original route followed Gracious Street, which is the yellow line going off from the top of High Street. So it's effectively a linear village, and it sits underneath Selborne Hanger, which of course is a very prominent geographical or topographical feature, have much influence on the village. I've referred to that 1993 document, and they did, although they didn't map them, they did identify a number of character areas, and I followed it as well. It seemed reasonable, and they are there. The white land is just the open land around it, but there are a number of character areas, they being High Street, the Plestor, Gracious Street, Under the Hill, and the Wakes Garden. So I'll run very quickly, just show you some pretty pictures so you know what we're dealing with. This is the Pless Door. This is actually the historic core of the village. It was the site of a marketplace. It was a marketplace. The village was given a market charter in 1270, and this is where it was held. And it's the historic core. You see, they've got the village and some very nice properties around it, and it is a lovely space. This is just some typical buildings of High Street. I could have done you quite a lot of slides. There's a great variety of buildings in High Street. I could have done 6 slides, but that just gives you a feel of the sort of thing we're talking about. A whole range of, wide variety of really attractive historic buildings. This is Gracious Street. As I say, this was historically the route, the main route, but it's not now, and it's still it's really quite a rural lane. Again, with some really attractive buildings, more spaced out than on High Street, so you get they're more dotted along the road, which sort of goes out into the countryside and slowly gets narrower and muddier and narrower and muddier. But it's got some lovely buildings, and it was the site of the Priory Grange. And the building that you're seeing there, bottom right, is the site of the Priory Grange. How much of the stonework in that building is from the Grange, one wonders, but one suspects they reused it. This is Hooker's Lane, which is one of the more minor lanes, but still got a few nice buildings, including a thatched barn, which could do with a bit of TLC. But generally speaking, the buildings are in good order, I have to say. And then that rather interesting one at the top, which has a timber frame sandwiched between 2 stone bits. And I've got a feeling one of the stone bits is actually moderately recent, but seems to have done quite well. And this is the area called Under the Hill. This is, the road goes out towards the south, and again, the buildings start getting more spread out, but still have some very nice ones. You can see 2 timber framed ones there. But Plum Fell Lane, which is what you can see just in the top view, rises up the slope of the hangar and gives you some nice views down open land towards the village. And then finally, the Wakes Garden. Now, this is actually a character area that I've added to the 93. Their character areas, because it's an extremely important heritage asset, the Wakes Garden. It is actually a grade 2-star entry on the Register of Historic Parks and Gardens. It's obviously associated, I haven't mentioned, but probably most of you know Gilbert White is the big connection in Selborne. This is his garden, and it goes with his property, which is the Wakes, which you can see in the backdrop of some of those photographs. I decided to identify it as a separate character area because it is the historic garden is quite distinct from the rest of the village, and it seemed to be sensible to do that. And it has a consequence for the boundaries, which I'll come on to in a minute. Right, so that hopefully gives you a flavour of the area. We did our usual public consultation, so there was a 6-week consultation period. Letters were sent to all properties in the conservation area, telling them of the consultation. Separate messages were sent to the parish, district and county councils. It was available on our website for all that time to view, for those who can do things online. But there was a paper copy available in the village for those who prefer to work that way. I was slightly surprised we had a very low level of response. I'm not sure whether that means they all think it's wonderful or that's the interpretation I'm choosing to put on that anyway. We had a response from the county archaeologist, which was fairly technical, a couple of residents, and for those of you who have been around long enough, Mr. Scammell gave me a comment. Because this current appraisal is rooted in some work that he started, so I sent it to him and he did give me a comment, which was really useful actually. Right, so the contents are fairly straightforward and standard, I hope. The one thing that I really need to draw to your attention is that some extensions are proposed to the current boundary, 3 of them. And I'll just run you through them, starting with the Wakes Garden. Most of the Registered Historic Park and Garden already falls within the boundary of the conservation area. But the area in sort of a light brown, I suppose you call it, which is marked the way it's gone, is within the registered historic part and gone, but not within the conservation area, which seems to me an anomaly. I'm not sure why it wasn't addressed in 93, the 93 review, but my proposal is now to make the boundaries of the conservation area coincide with the boundaries of the registered historic part and garden. The second area, the one marked with the green apron, this is where the relevance of the VDS kicks in. The green apron has been identified in the VDS. Again, most of it is within the conservation area boundary, but the area marked as the green apron isn't. So again, I'm trying to align the conservation area boundary with the village design statement in that regard. And then finally, there's a local green space just on the road out, and this was what Michael gave me comments on. He fought a number of appeals on that sort of area for resisting development, and he successfully did. So that's just to bolster the support for that area. So they're the three proposed extensions at the minute. So in terms of your recommendation, first of all, the usual one, which is to endorse and adopt the conservation area character appraisal for the purposes of development management and to inform the wider activities of the National Park Authority and its partners. Well, any of you have heard me before will be familiar with that recommendation. And secondly, to approve those three extensions as shown, well, it's figure 41 of the actual document, it's the figure that's in front of you, and the words I've just given you are also in paragraph 1.6 of your committee report. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any comments? Alan?
I just want to say what an excellent piece of work. I strongly, great one for David Boyson to go out on, if I can put it like that. No, exactly. Selborne is a most attractive village, and these, the plan as now proposed and the extensions to the conservation area seem to be very well and sensibly justified, and I would strongly support them.
Thank you.
And propose the resolution that's required.
Thank you. Gary?
And, short and sharp and sweet. Thank you, David. Those of us who voted against the proposal in Queen's, the pub, in Huckers Lane, were very grateful this was included in the conservation area because that formed my reasons for refusing it. So, and what you're proposing, the extra bits, I think is sensible. Thank you.
Debbie?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, no, I think it's a great document. My only comment would be that the Queen's is now known as the Jubilee Tap. And the sign you've got in your photograph is the sign of the Jubilee Tap. I recognise it because I helped design it.
Well spotted. Just in there to check you were reading it, you know. Right, the Queen's caused me quite a lot of problems in the writing of this document as to what to say about it, and what you're now read is several versions in. I will correct that name if that's what the committee wants. That's easily done.
Fine.
I mean, I could put the Jubilee Tap, formerly known as the Queen's, or something like that, if that's what people want.
Yes, perfect. Andrew?
Well, I'd like really to echo what Alan has said about the quality of this, but congratulations too to the photographers for managing to get rid of most of the cars which plague the area.
Yes,
I am the photographer. I'm the photographer, the author, the desktop publisher, and everything from beginning to end.
David, what will we do?
Congratulations then, in that case, to you. But no, seriously, I mean, that's the problem, is you have a pretty village in principle, which can be ruined by the number of cars which clutter up the place.
Vanessa?
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you, David. It's brilliant. And I assume that all the residents just saw it for the logical extension that it is and didn't get, yeah. Yeah, it's brilliant. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So I would echo the comments made about the quality of the document and your work. Thank you very much, David. We'll miss you. We need a seconder for the... Thank you, Gary. I'm sorry? Yes, and we need to include the amendment to the
Yeah,
name
Chairman,
of-
I was just
name
going to
of the
suggest that we make sure there's reference in the recommendation to making that amendment, because at the moment it just strictly approves the document appended.
Yes.
But we can add that wording on
Thank
that
you.
it's subject to that change.
Thank you. So can I have a show of hands, please, to support the recommendation? Thank you very much. That's carried unanimously. Thank you, David. And the next agenda item 9, is update on the duty to cooperate, which is Claire's bag.
Sorry about that. Right, find me right keys. This isn't going to be as pretty as David's presentation, I'm afraid. Hopefully of some interest. So the report in front of you covers the background to duty to cooperate. It covers the strategic cross-boundary themes, which you all approved back in November. And then it goes into correspondence that we've given in respect of other local planning authority, local plans, and then correspondence that we've received back in respect of our own local plan. And just a summary really of next steps after that. So in terms of the background, the report gives you a reminder of the legal duty to cooperate in plan making, which applies to ourselves, to our neighbouring local planning authorities, and also to some other organisations as well, people like Natural England, Environment Agency, etc. So that was the basis of the cooperation and alignment strategy that you approved back in November. That was part of the project initiation document for the local plan. And the background section of the report also gives you a reminder of the updates to the NPPF that we had in December, which obviously was after that committee decision. And just in terms of those updates, I've repeated them in full, but in a kind of plain English, it's been strengthened. So whereas you could perhaps have argued previously the duty to cooperate was a duty to talk, it's now very much a duty to find solutions. And that's really important when we talk about how we're trying to address that duty. In terms of the cross-boundary themes that you approved, I'm not going to read these out, but really to remind you that these are the things that we always have in mind whenever we're looking at our neighbours' plans or talking about which areas of our own plan that we need to discuss with neighbours, because these are the sort of issues that we think are the important matters that we need to look at across boundary and can't be addressed just by looking within the boundary of either ourselves or our neighbours. So the log that I've given you of our correspondence on other local planning authorities, local plans, that log goes back to March 2023, but we are intending to update this report from now on every 6 months. So it's a much longer list than you'll get going forwards. But I think it does really emphasise the amount of partners that we need to engage with and have engaged with at every stage of their plan. It's a very long list. And that's why that correspondence is delegated to officers, because, you know, if we had to come to planning committee with every single one of those, A, it would clog up your agenda, and B, it wouldn't meet their deadline. So that's essentially why that correspondence is left to officers. In terms of how we're responding now to other people's plans, obviously some of those partners have got a long way down the process. We've got 4 of those, Chichester, Winchester, Mid Sussex and Horsham, that are already at examination. So unless they come out with significant modifications as a result of that, you know, our correspondence with them is at an end, if you like. But we've got others, such as East Hampshire and Lewis, who are on very similar timelines to ourselves, that we will need to keep working proactively with to try and align our plans. And we've got others out there who are taking a step back, shall we say, because of the considerable changes that are going on, not just to the planning system, but obviously to the makeup of local authorities. In terms of the correspondence that we've received from those local authorities on our recent Regulation 18 consultation, I've given you very brief summaries of those. That's because we are still working through all of those responses, and we will then be going back to the authors of those responses to talk about any issues that they've raised. Just to refer to the update sheet, we have now received one from Lewis District Council that was mentioned in the report as us still awaiting that. We are expecting to bring you a report in July, which will summarise the headlines of all of those responses, but we will also be publishing them in full on our website, hopefully this month. Depending on how well we get on with the work of logging, which is going on at the moment. So very much in terms of next steps, we need to continue working with those local authorities to resolve any issues where we can that they've raised with our plan, and hopefully sign statements of common ground with them either before or after our Regulation 19 stage. And that's the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Well, I know Janet and Gary have got something to say, so would you two like to start?
Sorry about that, we do, as it happens. It could be premature for being on this list, but when the unitaries come in, will we add that to the list? And also, when the mayor of, certainly in Sussex side of it, you'll include that on the list as well when it comes to strategic planning. That's what we were discussing.
Yes, he said what I was going to say.
Right, so now we've all heard it. Claire?
Yes, so I suspect we will need to bring back to you a revised cooperation and alignment strategy to take into account all of those changes, because they are quite fundamental to how we deal with the duty to cooperate.
Thank you, Claire. Anybody else? John?
Just an update on the Chichester local plan. We've had the feedback from the inspectorate. It was minor modifications and it was passed by council, the response to those. So it's expected full adoption will be the end of the summer.
Right, thank you. Antonia?
Yes, just a quick question about East Hants District Council's comments, and with all due respect to Councillor McCatter, but where they make the comment Petersfield, Liss and Luphook should be taking more development, I mean, that presumably we simply have to set against our purposes and all our duty and our general priorities as a national park. Will we just say noted, or what do we do with that sort of comment?
So if you remember when we agreed, or when you agreed the Regulation 18 plan, we did make it clear that we would still be exploring further opportunities. We proactively invited people, including East Hampshire, to suggest additional sites to us. And we're going through a review process now to look at all of the sites that were submitted to us to see whether there is any potential for increasing numbers in settlements, including the ones listed. So obviously that assessment will need to take account of our purposes, yes.
Thank you. Anybody else? No? Good. In which case, the recommendation is that the committee is recommended to note the contents of this report. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good. Thank you very much. So we now come to the Planning and Infrastructure Bill and written ministerial statement. Claire?
I get all the interesting ones, don't I?
Yes, you do.
Okay. The report, it covers two main factors. So first is the written ministerial statement on statutory consultees, and that's got two parts to it, a kind of flagging of a future consultation that we can expect, but also some expectations about how we now deal with statutory consultees, which is interesting in reflection of the earlier debate. And then the second part of the report is around the Planning and Infrastructure Bill and what components that might have or does have that might affect us. So just dealing with the written ministerial statement first, the consultation we are expecting is around potentially reducing the number of statutory consultees, and the ones that have been flagged as coming off the list would be Sport England, Theatres Trust and the Gardens Trust, and I've included in the report how often we generally consult those, just to give you a feel for how much impact that would have. But obviously they will be looking at others as well as part of that. But we will see what that consultation includes when it comes along. More pertinent, I think, is the part of the written ministerial statement that bites now, which is around the expectations both for ourselves as local planning authorities and the statutory consultees themselves. So some of these are fairly obvious, and I think we do anyway, which is we only consult statutory consultees where we have to. We don't, generally speaking, voluntarily consult them. And if they don't come back within their time period, we do consider whether we can go ahead with a decision without those comments. So I think that's as it is at the moment. And again, the third one is fairly obvious. You wouldn't delay that decision unless there was really something around insufficient information, or that the delay may result in an approval rather than a refusal. And I think that again reflects, well, the decision that you took earlier. The last one is probably the most interesting, which is around advising statutory consultees that they should frame their responses as advice and not as an objection. So that's caused some interest, shall we say, and you know, we will see whether that in reality does happen from statutory consultees. The Ministry has said that they will be setting performance standards for statutory consultees and look at how they're funded going forward as well. But the whole tenor of the statement is really around trying to encourage those consultees to be supportive of development and promote growth rather than being blockers to growth, to adopt a phrase that is popular at the moment. So to come on to the bill, there are four main elements of this. So this is going through its committee stages at the moment. It's on a very fast track for a bill of this size. They're expecting Royal Assent autumn, latest end of the year, which is quite ambitious. So the first of those is around the ability for local planning authorities to set their own fees. So we did talk about this at an earlier report on planning reform as something that was being proposed in one of the working papers. This is only covering development management processes, and it would only be at a cost recovery level. And again, in the report, I've included some figures around what our DM service currently costs, and what we get back in fees, which is a roughly 4-to-1 ratio. So there is clearly quite a lot of room, potential to increase fees to actually start recovering our costs there. It doesn't cover enforcement and it doesn't cover plan making. So it is literally applications. Planning committee training will be mandatory with a certification system. So if you don't have a certificate to say you've sat through the training, you can't sit on planning committees. Again, that's been foreshadowed by what was in the working papers, so we've discussed before. That element will apply to us. The national scheme of delegation won't apply to national parks. And I think that was as a result of quite a lot of lobbying going on from the national parks to say, look, we're not the problem you're trying to solve. Our planning committees work quite well, actually. So, yeah, steer away from that. So that fortunately has been taken up. And then the last one, which is one that we've alluded to already, is around strategic planning and the setup where strategic authorities will be required to prepare spatial development strategies across a large geography. In this area, we think that will be Hampshire and Sussex as the two sort of big authorities that are currently going through consultation process at the moment. Again, I'd like to draw your attention to the update sheet because there is a paragraph that I put in quite late to the report, which I now wish I hadn't, which is paragraph 3.5, which refers to strategic planning boards and the opportunity perhaps to get a seat on those boards. It's since been clarified that those would only come into effect if the proposals for Hampshire and Sussex aren't successful. So if you've got a combined county authority, that will be the organisation that produces spatial development strategies. If you don't have such an organisation covering that whole geographic area, that's the point where you would default to these strategic planning boards. This is probably the part of the planning infrastructure bill which has been the most contentious. Again, it was forecast in the working paper that we've previously discussed. So this is about Natural England producing what's called environmental delivery plans aimed at conserving protected species or habitats, and that the implementation of those plans to be funded through a nature restoration levy that would be funded by developers. So once Natural England got that plan in place, a developer bringing forward a scheme within the relevant area could either commit to pay towards that levy, or they could continue under the existing system of needing to show individual mitigation for their proposals. This doesn't affect biodiversity net gain at the moment. That runs on its separate statutory track, although there has been a lot of speculation about whether if this works, it might then be applied to BNG, but that's not the proposal at the moment. And I think it's fair to say that the use of this type of scheme for things like nutrient and water neutrality is relatively uncontroversial, because obviously they are things which are already dealt with through strategic approaches, certainly in this area, obviously not as successfully elsewhere. Where the contention is applying this type of thing to protected species. There is something similar in place for great crested newts at the moment, in the sense that developers who think their sites are affected by great crested newts can either do let's carry out a survey, find out what the issue is and then mitigate, or they can move straight to what's called district level licensing, pay a fee, and then the mitigation happens through that strategic scheme. But the proposal that in itself was not uncontentious when it was brought in. A lot of people had concerns about that, but applying it to other species, I think, has raised a lot of concern in the environmental community, and there is a lot of lobbying going on at the moment to what's called Pause Part 3, which this is of the Act, to try and address those concerns. And then the last bit that is referred to in your report are some measures around streamlining NSIPs, Nationally Strategic Infrastructure Projects, and really the things that I brought out there is the bits that weren't in the legislation that we hoped for, that were in the working papers, which was about financially recompensing local authorities such as ourselves who have an NSIP coming forward in their area or near their area. That hasn't been included, although we have been quite successful at informal agreements with the developers of those proposals to recover some of our costs, but there's nothing in the legislation that would require that. There's also a little bit of concern that proposals within the Act that would allow applicants the choice of which consenting route they could go down might have implications. So at the moment, if you're under the threshold, then you come through the normal planning route. If you're over the threshold, then you have to go down the NSIP route. The proposal is that applicants are given the choice. Now, in theory, that could mean that we end up with proposals for very big solar farms, for instance. In reality, that's unlikely in a national park, but that might affect some of our neighbours going forwards. And then there's other provisions around rationalising the legislation around development corporations and CPOs as well, compulsory purchase orders, which are in the report, but I won't go into now. So just in conclusion, as I've referred to earlier, it's a very tight timetable for the bill. It's at committee stage. There is lobbying going on by some of our partners. Obviously, we don't lobby as an organisation, but we are aware that that's going on and we're keeping tabs on it. So we will be updating you with any significant changes to the bill as they go through. So the last part of that is views are invited to inform any engagement that we have with officials, the public and MPs.
Thank you, Claire. Members. Janet?
Well, a simple and selfish question, I guess. It's with regards to the training, which we've all had to do for years anyway. But now there is the added bit of having a certificate. So do we have to sit an exam to get a certificate? And also, those of us who sit on 2 different planning authorities, do we have to get a certificate on each authority, or is the training for one covering us? Do we know?
Claire.
We don't know the details yet. In answer to your last question, yes, I suspect you would, because you would need a certificate for whichever local planning authority you're on at the time. There is, you know, that they will be producing regulations setting out what's got to be in the training. We would likely to need additional training on top of that in terms of national park specific things, so that wouldn't be covered by the national training. But there will be a set syllabus, if you like, that all planning committee members need to show that they've covered.
Rob, you want to say something?
I was just going to say I hadn't thought about an exam, but now you mention it, I'll make notes of that.
Paul?
I like the fact that they're called completion certificates. It's like being like building regs, isn't it?
Yes.
I wanted to refer to 311, which I think is quite important, because there's all this business about Natural England, which is, you know, going large, as it were, and the opportunity for national park authorities to sort of come in on those in that new legislation and
we can't hear you, Paul. We can't hear you. Can you bring in
for national park authorities to be sort of agents, if you like, or delivery bodies for Natural England? I think it's, you know, the prospects of Natural England being another body that developers are going to have to deal with and negotiate with when you've got a national park with similar aims seems crazy to me and quite contrary to the government's ambitions for growth. So I would be very supportive of the push that national parks appear to be making in this regard on 311.
Did you want to comment? No, no comment. Anybody else? Vanessa?
Yeah, I'm just echoing what Paul said. I think it's absolutely imperative that we get across that we are the delivery vehicles that could do this work. And if you can't do it in a national park, where can you do it? And I don't think Natural England are those people. So definitely, I think everybody's on that case. Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else? No? In which case, we see the recommendation before us. The committee is recommended to note the contents of this report. Thank you. And finally, agenda item 11, which is the community planning update. And Lewis is going to deliver this for us.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members. So this is your 6th monthly or biannual update for all things community planning across the South Downs National Park. First of all, I'd like to draw your attention to the update sheet. There are 4 updates in relation to this item. The first 2 I'll raise later in the presentation so that they are raised in their context. As for the latter 2 updates, these are just corrections to Appendix 1, which is the list of all the made neighbourhood development plans. Very quickly, these 2 corrections are regarding the Bramshot and Liphook NDP. Apologies, that was omitted. It was made back in December and therefore should be on the list. Apologies, Debbie. And then the second correction is the Sedham and Ipping NDP. There was a typo in the date it was made, and that has obviously been corrected as well. Otherwise, I'll move on to the main presentation itself. So, as with previous updates, the report summarises the last 6 months and sets out what we're anticipating over the next 6 months. I do recall from the last update back in October that members were very focused on numbers. And so we have attempted to strike a balance in this latest report of recognising your focus on numbers without making it too number heavy. Obviously, always welcome to critique, which you can give me later on how the report is presented. To clarify before we get into the details, just as a reminder, there are 3 types of community planning documents that we work with across the National Park. These are neighbourhood development plans, or NDPs, parish or village design statements, and parish priority statements, or PPSs. So I'll do a quick summary of what all these 3 are, and then we'll get on to the maps and the detailed updates. So with neighbourhood development plans, or NDPs, these are prepared by qualifying bodies, which are normally town or parish councils or neighbourhood forums, as per the process and requirements set out in the Neighbourhood Planning Regulations 2012. Once an NDP has passed a successful referendum and has been made by the local planning authority, it becomes part of the development plan alongside the local plan and the minerals and waste plans. In the National Park, there are 62 designated neighbourhood areas, of which 45 have made NDPs, and the full list is found in Appendix 1 in your report packs, and they are set out in a map in Appendix 2 of your report packs. The second document is the parish and village design statements. These are prepared by community steering groups, normally with the support of a town or parish council, and they're used to identify, describe, and outline the distinctive and local landscape character, design, and special qualities of a parish or village, the geography of which is the choice of the steering group. The identified character, design, and special qualities are then used to inform design guidelines to help inform and guide future development in that particular parish or area. So that the design statements can become material considerations in the determination of planning applications and appeals. The authority works with the steering groups to ensure that they can be adopted as supplementary planning documents, or SPDs, as per the process and requirements set out in the Town and Country Planning, local planning regulations. And then across the South Downs National Park, there are 11 design statements adopted as SPDs. And again, if you refer to Appendix 2, you'll be able to see where these are. And then finally, the third document, the Parish Priority Statements, or the PPSs. The Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, or the LURA, introduced neighbourhood priority statements as a, and this is quoted, optional and light touch alternative to neighbourhood development plans. These statements provide communities with the opportunity to set out future aspirations and identify local planning issues in their areas for local planning authorities such as ourselves to have regard to in the preparation of our own local plans. This authority carried out an informal pilot of said priority statements back in February 2023. Because it was a pilot, we renamed it as Parish Priority Statements. And as of March 2025, we have received 43 Parish Priority Statements from parishes and town councils across the National Park. This is the equivalent to about a quarter of all the town and parish councils across the National Park itself. And you'll see in the report, obviously, some of these overlap with areas that already have neighbourhood development plans and parish design statements as well, so please refer to the report there. Right, so in translating all I have just said and read out, I'd like to draw your attention to Appendix 2, which has the map of the national park showing where the neighbourhood development plans and the village and parish design statements are. It's also on the screen above me. In terms of parish priority statements, we haven't included this on the map just because we worried it might become a little bit unwieldy and unhelpful on the map. However, we are going to look to find another way for the next biennial update in October this year to try and represent the parish priority statements in some way. But for now, this gives you a geographical idea of where the main community planning work has been taking place and is continuing to take place. So on to the main update. I'm not going to dwell on the past 6 months because you've lived it and breathed it, and I think you probably already know about it. So I'm going to focus on the coming 6 months, the things to look out for, the things that we are anticipating. So regarding Peacehaven and Towscombe Neighbourhood Development Plan, this is being led on by Lewis District Council. It's still at examination, and we do expect some progress on this later in the year. With the Pulborough and West Chiltington neighbourhood development plans, these are both being led on by Horsham District Council, and they are anticipated to move forward once the Horsham local plan examination hearings have concluded. With Easton and Friston neighbourhood development plan, I'd like to draw your attention to the update sheet. Obviously, these reports are written and signed off a number of weeks before we get to committee. And community planning is an ever-evolving beast, and things happen in between that time. So last week, we actually received from the Parish Council, they formally submitted their neighbourhood development plan to us. We are currently carrying out a legal compliance check to ensure that we can then move forward with the Regulation 16 public consultation, and as normal, you will be notified when this consultation kicks off. Regarding the Coldine and the Boxgrove neighbourhood development plans, these are being led on by Brighton and Hove and Chichester respectively, and we anticipate their submission and Regulation 16 consultations later this year, so 2 to look out for. Regarding West Saltdean, this is being led on by Brighton and Hove, and we anticipate the examination later this year. Just for context, the Reg 16 consultation ended last month, I believe. And then finally, Ovingdean, again drawing attention to the update sheet. Since this report was finalised and signed off, a consultation on both the Ovingdean neighbourhood area and neighbourhood forum has started. This started on the 26th of March and is due to close on the 14th of May. And just to clarify, that's a proposed designation of both the neighbourhood area and the neighbourhood forum for the public to comment on. And then the recommendation is on the screen above me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lewis. Any comments? Andrew.
My only comment is that, as it pointed out, I think is it 43 parishes? Have 43 parishes made parish priority statements. They were put forward, and I believe it's still open for parishes to put them in, even though the official time has long gone. But I think parishes are slightly wondering what's happened to that material, because whilst the local plan is taking part, there is no, it's very covert, the way that information is being taken forward. And I'm wondering if there is any way, without putting too much burden on people, that come possibly parts of the process where one can say something about it, one can refer to parishes that this information is being used in this way, because it won't necessarily cost us anything, but I think it will send a bit of reassurance back to parishes who've done this. And whilst it isn't as time-consuming as the other forms of paperwork we've just been referring to, nevertheless, effort has been put into it, and I think there's a need for tangible reward.
Fair enough. Are we in a position to go out and give them this information?
Yes, so those PPSs were taken into account when we drew up the Regulation 18 local plan, particularly for allocations. So where we had a PPS saying we need X, Y, and Z, those were taken into account when we were looking at the details of those allocations. We do have our spring newsletter coming up, so I can put something in there just to reassure them on that count.
Thank you. John.
Thanks. I think that would, sorry, just if I can just come back, Madam Chairman. I think that would be really helpful and useful. As I say, it ticks a box saying we thought about you, and we do try to, you know, we want the feedback from the parishes, we feed back to them.
Sure. John.
Yeah, just a couple of points. You mentioned the 43 PPSs, and I can't remember how many VDSs. In terms of what percentage are they of the parishes, would be useful to know. And leading on to my second point, there's lots of spaces in this which are covered by sort of micro parish councils, which probably don't even need to do PPSs and VDSs. And again, it would be useful in some ways to have a map to illustrate those that don't need to participate in this, or there's no mileage in them participating. So the success rate, if you like, of those that do need to participate is more visual, if you get my point.
Would you like to just put the map up that shows who's done it and who hasn't, or who's done them and who? That's the one. I think it's quite interesting to see how many white places there are on there that haven't actually done anything at all. And I can understand your concern, who needs to and who doesn't, but it might be easier to just identify who does need to rather than who doesn't need to.
Thank you very much. Okay, so just to caveat before we get down to the numbers, there's 176 town and parish councils across the national park, but they don't cover every single inch. Remember, there are some areas that don't have parishes. So the percentage I give you is just of that number. It will vary. So parish priority statements, there's 43, which is the equivalent of about 25%. Village and parish design statements, there are 11, which is the equivalent of my quick and dirty maths on my phone, which is about 6%. And then we would do a quick neighbourhood plan one. Yes, similar to the PPS, in fact it's about 25%, if that helps you. Obviously we can verify and put the specific numbers into the next update in October.
Just on the issue of whether it's worth doing, I mean, the whole sort of reason for introducing PPSs, sorry, is because they are more appropriate for smaller parishes. They can be, you know, two sides of an A4. I think even for the smallest micro parish, it's useful for them to set out what their priorities are, for their own sake, if not ours.
Yeah, absolutely. Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. The overlap you mentioned briefly there, Lewis. So one of the points about this that's interesting to me is whether the PPS is seen as a more attractive option as opposed to neighbourhood plans that has happened in the past. So is it the case that it's the majority of those parishes that already have neighbourhood plans are also submitting PPSs as a light touch? Or are we expanding beyond those core areas? What's the overlap percentages? Forget the percentages bit.
Thank you for that question. And before I answer, I'm just going to caveat again to John's. Obviously, there is some overlap, so those percentages don't cover the fact that some parishes have, you know, all three kind of things. Just to give you a flavour, an idea, but I wouldn't take them as gospel. And then related to that, Stephen, you'll see in the report we have tried to set out where there's overlaps, where there's not. It's really down to the communities and how they feel they want to be represented. So, for example, lists are, you know, they do a lot of work. They have all three. They have a neighbourhood plan, design statement, and a parish priority statement. One good thing about the PPS is that we have had 26 parishes that previously have had nothing have come forward, which is really great. That's more than we've had before. So it really depends on what the community want to do, how they wish to present themselves. We can't force them. We can just, you know, merrily take the information that they give us when they want to give us it and advise as we possibly can. I hope that answers your question, but if not, do come back to me.
Yes, it does, Lewis. Thank you. But I'm just wondering, given that there's so many, what was that, 12% thereabouts? Again, dirty maths in my head, of locations that have a PPS. Are we going to try to encourage parishes, or are we happy that they're not doing it? Do we think we need to sell the benefits of PPSs more? What's the strategy, and do we have a target for the amount of parishes that we'd like to have various plans of various types?
My newsletter is getting longer. Yeah, I mean, I think we would like to see more. The purpose of them is to input to local plans, primarily. That's what the legislation says. But as I said earlier, I think they're useful to parishes anyway. So I'm happy to add that bit into the newsletter in terms of encouraging those that haven't done that to have a look at the PPSs that are on our website so they can see what they look like, see the sort of level of work that would go into them, and encourage them to do the same. I think it's really important. It's a really useful way, particularly as we move forward into local government reorganisation, where parishes are going to become potentially more important as a local voice, that they understand what it is that their communities want. And remember, PPSs have to be based on community involvement. It can't just be the parish councillor's view.
Vanessa.
Yes, I'm just thinking, because there was kind of like a big push to get the PPSs for the local plan work. And I think that would be quite good to have another kind of go at that afterwards, because I think there's probably a bit of confusion. I know from my parish, it was like we just didn't get it together. But I think with the local government reorganisation, especially like a micro parish like I am, which is like tiny amount of people, huge amount of space, very significant area, perhaps we need to look at thinking of parish clusters, because really we're losing that kind of that middle tier district council thing. But I think if we could work in some clusters, especially where I am, I'm thinking Cuckmere Valley as a cluster, that would be really quite interesting. So, but I know that, you know, we're going through this local plan process. I think we've got to kind of obviously manage officer capacity. And yeah, I just think that's something that we can revisit and look at, especially when we know what the landscape, local government landscape is going to look like. I think that would be a good place to kind of revisit it. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Janet.
I note what Vanessa has just said, and I'm sure she probably already knows this, but a lot of the parishes are already working in clusters. I don't think they're necessarily looking at us to set the clusters up for them. They know who they're associated with, and I know some of my local ones have regular meetings.
Yes, yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? John.
Would we carrying on from what Vanessa just said, would we be receptive to having a sort of a cluster of villages coming together to deliver one PPS?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Okay, thank you for all that. Can we now go to the recommendation, which is the committee is recommended to note the progress to date on the preparation of the neighbourhood development plans, parish and village design statements, parish priority statements across the park, with the added comments that we've made about what you will be doing in the future to encourage more people to be doing these things. Thank you very much. That concludes our meeting, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. See you next month. Done.